Thank you.
Chair,
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to this meeting of Babergh District Council's Planning Committee. It's the first virtual meeting to be conducted by Babergh District Council. So please do bear all with us. We've done some training on it. We've done quite a bit of homework the members have, so hopefully it will go through reasonably well this morning. But please do bear with us. Before I commence the meeting properly, I, on your behalf, would like to pay our respects to Nick Ridley, who recently passed away earlier this month. He was a past Babergh councillor who served on the council for 16 years, from 2003 to 2019, and I've served with him in all that time, and so has many others on the committee. He's been on the planning committee quite a lot, and it was sudden and sad, his passing. The chairman of Babergh District Council, Councillor John Ward, will be paying tribute and respects to him at the next full council meeting. So I will now leave that to him. But I felt we should just note that. Thank you. May I first of all remind you of some of the domestic arrangements. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use. That's muted in this case. That you do not interrupt other speakers. Members are reminded that they should not have alternative communication lines open, i.e. other Skype chats, and that if you are contacted by a third party during the application, you should bring this to the legal advisor's attention, which will come to, I'll introduce later. If you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. If a member of the committee is conducted by a third party during the meeting, then they must bring this to my attention as soon as possible. If members do lose connection to the meeting, that they must contact the member support officer, Mandy Smith, as soon as possible, and you all now have that number. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewings. The whole of the meeting will be recorded, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the council to have consented to being recorded. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the council and to the possible use of those sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and press are not lawfully excluded. That's the formalities, members. I'd now like to introduce the officers present. We have Stephen Stroud, and his official title is Strategic Projects and Delivery Manager. I shall refer to you as Chief Planning Officer for today, Stephen. Joe Hobbs is the Case Planning Officer, who will introduce the case. Ian Dupre is the planning lawyer for Babergh District Council, and I should refer to him as legal. And Robert Carmichael, who's brought all this together, is the government officer, and I'll refer to him as Officer Carmichael. Now can I move to the agenda, please? I will ask the government officer to a roll call for members present. Over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Just check one thing. There we are. So I will now call out your name if you could just say good morning or present or anything along those lines. So Councillor Ayres.
Good morning.
Councillor Barrett.
Yes, good morning.
Councillor Beer.
Present.
Councillor Busby.
Oh yeah, I'm here.
Councillor Hinton. Okay, we'll come back to that in a moment. Councillor Jamieson.
Morning.
Councillor McLaren.
Good morning.
Councillor Osborne.
President, correct.
Councillor Owen.
Good morning.
Councillor Parker.
Present.
And Councillor Plum.
Present.
And I believe I've just seen
Oh, I
Councillor
see.
Hardacre has just joined as well.
Yep, I'm here.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, so I would just ask my colleague Mandy again if you wouldn't mind seeing if you could contact Councillor John Hinton regarding that. In the meantime, I'll just ask Mr. Dupre if we carry on again until we get to the actual formality part of the application, if that's acceptable.
Yes, Mr. Carmichael, I agree. I don't think we can't see Councillor Hinton in the list of attendees. But if this was a normal committee meeting, we would get on with doing the formalities and minutes, etc. And if he arrived in time for the first item, that'd be quite lawful. So I agree. We proceed on that basis.
Thank you. Yes, I concur with all that. He wasn't on my list that I went through just before we started of answering. So let's hope we can contact him. Right, members, we'll carry on to receive declarations of interest by members. Do we have any? We're going to ask the members, will call their names out and you'll answer that you do or you don't. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Robert?
Councillor Ayres.
None.
Councillor Barrett.
None.
Councillor Beer.
None.
Councillor Busby.
None.
Councillor Jamieson.
None.
Councillor McLaren.
None.
Councillor Osborne.
None.
Councillor Owen.
None.
Councillor Parker.
None.
Councillor Plum.
None.
And Councillor Hardacre.
I don't know if I do, because I'm here on behalf of the ward regarding the planning application rather than as a member.
Yep,
That
that makes
Yeah.
sense, Chair. But we still have to ask on that sense, because even if you are the ward member, you could still have an interest in an application beyond being a
Yeah,
ward
no,
member.
none beyond that.
Brilliant. Chair,
Yeah,
if you're...
nothing beyond that.
Thank you, Councillor. Chair, if it's all right, I'll just read out that other statement with regards to the application before us today. So, as members have previously heard one of the applications before at the committee that took place last year, I would remind members that they should approach this application with an open mind, and if any member does not feel that they can do this, I would advise them not to take part in the meeting. I just want to make that clear,
Yes,
Chair, before we begin.
Yeah, I'll endorse that. So are there any to declare? Again, you need to do the roll call. So we start with Councillor Ayres.
So I'm sorry, may I butt in, Chair? I think I ought to do this here, just rather before we go into that. In that, as an officer, as your legal advisor, I must just say briefly, as I did when a slightly different application came to us over a year ago, that I know Mr. Levitt, one of the speakers, professionally through the local legal profession, because he's the resident judge at Ipswich Crown Court. I don't go to court very often these days, but in my previous job on the other side of the county, I knew him well when he was a barrister and later as a judge. But that sort of thing crops up quite often, and there is no obstacle to me carrying on as your legal advisor, but it just ought to be noted. Thank you.
I think when we had it at the full planning meeting and we were all present, you said the same things there. So yes, I think that's all quite acceptable. Okay, Rob, over to you.
Okay, for just that second point then, so Councillor Ayres.
No, I'm fine.
Councillor Barrett.
No, none.
Councillor Beer.
None.
Councillor Busby.
Yeah, same for me.
Councillor Hinton.
You've got to say yes.
Sorry, Councillor Hinton's not here yet.
None.
Apologies. Oh, is that Councillor Hinton joined? Was that? Sorry, I'm just checking the list there, Chair. So, Councillor Jamieson,
None.
Councillor McLaren,
None.
Councillor Osborne,
None.
Councillor Owen,
None.
Councillor Parker,
None.
and Councillor Plum.
None.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, we can then move on to the next point, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of March. Are there any points regarding accuracy of the minutes? They've been sent round. Can I have a proposer, please?
Can I propose that we accept the minutes? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And a seconder?
Yes, I will second that.
Thank you. Then I'll ask the officer again, Rob, to take a roll call vote, which we have to do in this case. So again, over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. So if you could please respond with for, against, or abstain. So Councillor Ayres,
4.
Councillor Barrett,
4.
Councillor Beer,
4.
Councillor Busby,
4.
Councillor Jamieson,
4.
Councillor McLaren,
4.
Councillor Osborne,
4.
Councillor Owen,
4.
Councillor Parker,
4.
and Councillor Plum.
4.
That's carried, Chair. I'd also just like to note
Thank you
that I
very
believe
much.
Councillor Hinton has joined the meeting, so if possible, Chair, I'd just like to ask if there are any declarations of interest from Councillor Hinton.
Yes, Councillor Hinton, do you have any interest, declarations of interest to declare? Councillor Hinton, can you hear us? Don't seem as though we can get.
Is Councillor Hinton muted or unmuted? It's, I know.
Yes, that could be a point. Councillor Hinton, are you still muted? If you've got to cross through the microphone, then that means we can't hear you. And we still can't hear you.
Chair, illegal here. Could Mandy phone him or something? Can we just see if this?
Yep.
He obviously is here on our attendance list.
Right. Well, while you're sorting that out, I'll go back to the minutes, if that's okay, Rob, and just read out a little bit on that. Right. The vote was for approval of the minutes of the 11th of March, and the minutes of the meeting have been confirmed and will be signed at the next practical opportunity, members. Okay. Thank you. I'll just carry on. I'll stop before we get to the schedule of applications. Item 5, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme. Councillor Officer Carmichael, can you comment?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Site inspections. Officers, are there any site inspection requests? That's Stephen.
Yeah. Not at this point, Chair. There was a query from Councillor Owen that I'm aware of yesterday, but I think that's been covered now if she's able to confirm. Thank you.
Okay, so you have none to request. Members, are there any site inspection requests that you wish to put forward? I'll take that as a no, rather than go all through the roll call, because you would light up if you wanted to comment. And you haven't. Thank you very much. So I'll now go back to you, Rob. Have we got a connection with Councillor John Hinton?
Not at present, Chair. I believe my colleague is working on it.
Well, we'll take a 5-minute little adjournment to see if we can get him connected. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think I'm with you now. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, John.
Oh, the computer was fighting back this morning. I don't know what it was up to.
Right. Well, I can hear you loud and clear. There's just a couple of things I need to ask you, and you'll just need to say yes or no to, if that's okay, John. Councillor Hinton. One is, do you have any number of interest by members?
Nope.
Thank you. And what was the other one? To confirm minutes, we've done that, didn't we?
It's legal here. Good morning, Councillor Hinton. It's Ian Dupre here, through you, Chair. You may not have heard, if you were having trouble getting in, the Councillor Hinton, I can't recall whether you were one of the councillors present in April last year when we had a similar application on the same site. Well, if you're not, the chairman has asked all members to
I'll read it out to him.
Yes, thank you.
This was to all members, and I'll just put John's name. John, as we previously heard one of the applications before, I would remind members that they should not approach this application with an open mind. If any member does not feel that they can do this, I would advise them not to take part in the meeting. So you've got to say yes or no to that.
Yes, what?
Did you have an open mind?
I have an open mind, yes, but I don't believe that I was at the last meeting.
Oh, well, that's even much easier. Thank you very much, Councillor Hinton. Right, so we're now all still present, so we'll carry on. We're now on item 6A. The schedule of planning applications. They will be taken in the following order: DC/18/02010 and DC/18/02412. Land on the east side of Brantford Road, known as Lorraine Way, Sproughton, Suffolk. I will now invite the case officer, Joe Hobbs, to introduce the application to the committee. Case officer presents the application. Okay, it's over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen with everyone so you can see the presentation. Bear with you one moment while that loads up. Okay, could I just get confirmation, Chair, that you can see that presentation okay?
No, I can't.
Okay, we'll give it a
yes,
moment.
It's there. I've
Fantastic.
got it. Has all other members got it? If you haven't, just say no.
Fine.
Yep, taking that to
Okay.
the
Lovely, thank you, Chair. So the application before members today is an application for 49 dwellings in the village of Sproughton, which is just showing, being highlighted on the slide there. The application is 49 dwellings, a full application. It includes 17 affordable dwellings, which is the full 35% requirement, open space, access from Lorraine Way, footpaths, and there are a number of bungalows, houses, and a few flats, which I will show you through the plans as we go through the application. Now, just to point out at this point, there are two application numbers before you, and they are two identical duplicate applications. Members have seen one of the applications before. We presented 18/02010 last April, but now we are presenting both applications and seeking a resolution on both applications today. I will go through the case history and why we are where we are in a short while. So just to give some more context on the site location, here we have the site highlighted in blue, village of Sproughton, Ipswich to the east, the A14, and in Brantford to the north. And just to give the site in a little bit more detail, here is the site location plan, and just to highlight in the core strategy, the current core strategy, Sproughton is identified within the Ipswich fringe, but also a hinterland village. Just to show the in detail location, we've got the B1113 or Lorraine Way. It's also identified as Brantford Road in the application documents, but it is Lorraine Way. And to the south of the site, we have Lower Street, Birstall Lane, and just to give some context, we've got the Wildman Public House at that junction there, so that's just to show where it is. So the application history, as I just advised, members resolved last April on one of the applications. That previous application was for 54 dwellings. I will show a plan of that previous development in a short while. Members resolved to refuse that application on heritage grounds, as shown in page 51 of our agenda documents today. And there was also discussion around flood risk. At the committee meeting, officers advised that there were some flood risk issues that we were still discussing with the Environment Agency. And whilst the Environment Agency had no objection, unfortunately, the development that members saw failed the sequential test. This meant that, in effect, there was a second reason for refusal regarding flood risk. The applicants asked if they could resolve this matter on flood risk so we could narrow down the reasons for refusal, and officers considered this request. Under our core strategy policy 1, we are required to work positively and proactively with developers to try and resolve issues, and so we did agree to allow the applicants to try and resolve the flood risk issue. To resolve the flood risk issue, the site layout plan needed to be amended to, in effect, remove the development from the higher risk flood zone. The applicants at the same time also sought to try and address the heritage issue, which I'll show you in the plan shortly. The revised layout has then led to the fact that members have not seen this revised plan, and is now leading to us needing to reconsider the applications, as in effect members haven't resolved on the current plans on the application. So today we're asking members to consider the revised plans for both applications and to make a resolution on those. So just to show the slides of, this is the previous layout plan for 54 dwellings currently on the slide, and if I just play the animation, it transitions through to the new layout. Now members, you'll see it will just transition a few times and then stop. The new layout, which it will end on, shows that the development has been pulled back both from the heritage listed buildings to the top of the slide here, and also removing the development from the flood zone, which is where I'm just showing with my mouse now. If you just bear with me 1 second, I will just make the mouse a little bit more visible. There we go. So the development has been pulled back from this area here, which is the high risk flood zone, and this open space has been created here, just pulling back the development slightly. So just to show the previous development again and the current layout. So just to give a little bit of other context on the site, and just to mention the tabled papers before we get too far into the application, there have been 264 objections on this application and 1 neutral comment, so just to point that out to members. And just to say, on the tabled papers which members have received, there is 1 additional consultee comment from our Environmental Health Officer, and the matters they raise can be covered by conditions. There's 1 additional condition suggested in that tabled paper to do with the sewage treatment plant on site, just making sure we have the noise level information for that. And there are a couple of minor clarifications to the report to note as well on that tabled paper. So just to move on to the constraints now of the site. Here is the site shown or outlined in orange, and we have the key constraints. We have the flood zone 2 and 3 along the River Gipping, which is just in the centre of that blue area. We have a number of listed buildings. I will show us another slide in a second in a little bit more detail, because they're quite small on this slide. And just to show, the area in brown that has just appeared is the existing development boundary in Sproughton, and this site sits outside of that development boundary. Here is a slide of the listed buildings which has been provided with the application. I'm just going to run through them each and to show the grading of the buildings. So we have Sproughton Hall, which is a grade 2 listed building. The Tithe Barn and the barn near Sproughton Hall, those 2 barns which are both grade 2. The Mill and Mill House in Sproughton, both grade 2. The Church of All Saints, which is a grade 2 star listed building. And then 1 to 4 Church Close, grade 2. Lower House and Stores, grade 2. 2 to 4 Lower Street, grade 2. The Wellburn Public House, grade 2. And Walnut Cottage, grade 2. And then the final constraints, just to point out to members, the light green area, which is across the whole of the site here, is special landscape area, and we have public rights of way along the Gipping River. So now just to show photos of the site, we've got the site location plan and an arrow pointing where we are looking. So here we are looking south down the B1113. The application site is on the left. And just to note, on the right-hand side, there is another site which is subject to a planning application being considered at the moment. I will show that on another slide later in the presentation. And here we are looking across the site towards the church and Sproughton Hall and the two barns that are listed. And just a further photo slightly back, and here you can see the electricity lines which are run over the site but are clearly separate from the developable area. As you can just see from the site layout plan here, there's no development proposed under those electricity lines. And here we are looking towards the development existing housing along Lorraine Way. It's a slightly closer view of the group of listed buildings. Taken from the south of the site towards Sproughton Hall. And just looking towards the existing dwellings on Lower Street. And just a closer look here, behind here, just where I'm hovering the laser now, is the junction, the Wildman Public House. So we've got the development going along Lorraine Way and Lower Street here. And just look at those houses right next to the site on Lower Street, just swinging around the south of the site. And a long view looking north on the site. And that's the view from the access to the Tithe Barn and the community shop. And just to point out here, this is where one of the proposed footpaths from the site will come through to connect the site to Lower Street. And the last few photos just looking north along Lorraine Way, and just to point out to the right hand side here where I'm just hovering the laser now, this is the location of the second footpath connecting the development to Lorraine Way, which comes out through this gap here between the two houses. This vegetation, scrubby vegetation, would be clear to provide that footpath link. And then we've just got a couple of slides that are submitted from the longer range landscape views, slides from the applicant's supporting documentation. And here we're just looking down the B1113, so we're looking south, and it just shows the approximate extent of the site. And then the bottom slide, it shows the visibility of the site from the Gipping Valley Riverwalk, so public footpath 22. And you can just see from that red line across the top of the plan there, the extent of the site. So you would see glimpse views of development towards the left-hand side of the site here. And then again, just views across the public footpath and from further north, just showing the glimpsed views that you will see from a wider range. So just to go through the site layout plan in detail and just pull out some of the particular features. The access here would be proposed here with a dedicated right-hand turning lane on the B1113. So one access in and then internal roads. I will have a slide shortly to show which roads are to be adopted. Just to draw out the public footpaths, we have footpaths being created within the development, We have a footpath which is being created through this area here and coming out at the community barn, Tithe Barn on Lower Street here. And that's the second footpath coming out on Lorraine Way, which I just showed the photos of. Here are the electricity lines running through the development, which, as I mentioned earlier, are clear from the proposed development. Other features to note is we have a tree preservation order on site that is proposed to be retained and protected here. And just to generally pull out the other details of this revised proposal, we have a slightly formal landscaped area here and intentionally designed to try and reduce the impact on the heritage assets, which I will go through in a moment. And a good area of landscape ground here and open space which will be available for future residents and residents of Sproughton. Here's an indicative layout of landscaping plan. It is on the previous layout of development, so please actually do ignore the actual dwellings, but it just gives, there's been slight amendments to the dwellings, but this gives an indication of the layout of the landscaping in this formal space and over here, and it also shows where the surface water storage feature would be on the site just to the north where I'm hovering now. Here's a model of the proposed development. It's taken from here's a collection of listed buildings, so the community barn and the barn associated with Sproughton Hall. So it's just showing development looking towards the B1113 along the back of the slide there. Just to draw out the building heights, the applicant has responded to concerns initially raised in the application and proposed that there are single-storey dwellings just where this brown shape has appeared here, to try and respond and respect the scale of the existing development along Lower Street and try and reduce the impact on close neighbours. The remainder of the development is two-storey. And here's just a plan to show the external works and the materials to be used on, say, the hard landscaping. But in particular, I just want to draw your attention to the roads that would be adopted, which are just shown as yellow here, highlighted in yellow. So these are the roads that the applicant is proposing to be adopted, which the Highway Authority have accepted and raised no objection to. Now I just want to run through some typical elevations of the proposed built form. The red arrow just shows where the plot is that I'm referring to. So this is at the entrance to the site, plot 45. And just the other side of the entrance, plot 2. And an example of one of the bungalows to the south of the site, just to show the use of different types of materials on the site, including some black weatherboarding, just to add a bit of design variation and good design quality. And also here is one of the dwellings to the east of the site, which uses white weatherboarding. Just draw attention to one of the larger buildings on site, which is shown here. This is proposed 6 residential affordable flats. It's a slightly larger building, but officers consider that as it overlooks the open space, the scale is acceptable and would not contravene any design standards. And just to show the development, which is visible, glimpse through the existing vegetation as you travel south down the B1113. This is one of the buildings closest to the road. So just to identify the affordable housing, we've sought to ensure the affordable housing is distributed throughout the development. There's no larger group than 12 affordables in one location, because obviously we want to try and make sure that affordables are integrated into the wider development and not just located in one area. So these dots, the blue dots, show affordable rent units and the purple shared ownership units. And just to make a comparison to show that the development would be tenure blind, we've ensured that the design detailings on the market dwellings is very similar to the affordable dwellings. Obviously there's some variations, but we want to make sure that obviously the design quality is as good on the affordable dwellings as it is the market dwellings. Okay, so that's the end of the plans, and now I just want to run through the key issues and just go through a couple of the issues in a bit more detail, just to explain them to members. So the key issues, as officers see, it's the application site is obviously outside development boundaries. There is a landscape impact as detailed in the report, although only moderate to adverse across a small area of the site as surrounding footpaths, and in the wider landscape context, not significant overall landscape harm, but it is important to note there is some moderate adverse harm to some areas when viewing the development. Local housing need. The applicants have submitted some information, but as detailed in the report, they have not submitted a full local housing needs assessment. However, on balance, there is information from the local community about the housing need, and so we consider that on balance there is sufficient information, and it's not sufficiently lacking to merit a reason for refusal on this application. So we just note that the information provided could be better, but it is sufficient. And heritage impact, which is one of the key issues. I will go through a little bit more detail shortly on the precise nature of the heritage impact, but it has been identified by officers, both the heritage officer and myself, as a medium level of less than substantial harm, which obviously engages paragraph 196 of the NPPF to require us to consider whether the public benefits of the scheme outweigh that harm. We will come to that conclusion later. The benefits of the scheme: this site is considered to be in a good location, a more sustainable location than some other sites within the district. Obviously, it's in close proximity to Ipswich, the A14. Another key benefit is the provision of housing, 49 dwellings, and it's a full complement of 35% affordable housing. And there is a net gain for biodiversity on the site with the proposed measures that are being put in that would be secured by condition. Also, we do have to have regard for the NPPF, and this site would look to help the council boost its supply of housing, which is a requirement under paragraph 59 of the NPPF. And it's also a site which could be considered to be a small to medium-sized site, which are encouraged in the NPPF under paragraph 68 to help with the supply of your housing, as it can often be delivered in a quicker manner than some of the larger scale sites. So they're just material considerations to bear in mind. So to look at heritage in particular, here I've just got a slide of the applicant's assessment of the setting of listed buildings, and I just want to show this. This is one of the key areas of discussion that we've had. The applicant, just showing their current proposed layout for 49 dwellings under here, have shown where they consider the setting for listed buildings are. So I'm just hovering over Sproughton Hall, where they consider the setting is. And then there's obviously a wider setting of the church, which goes through the site. Now, officers do not necessarily agree with this assessment. The setting of a listed building is difficult to really kind of perhaps draw it so tightly as this. And as you'll see in the committee report, we considered that the functional relationship of this cluster of listed buildings and this land are more affected by this development than say this plan would say. So we consider that this proposed development is within the setting of these listed buildings, and the line doesn't really stop here is the best way to describe it. So this development we still consider has a medium level of less than substantial harm, even after the revisions to pull this development back that the applicant has made. And so in this sense, the level of harm is still the same in officers' opinions as the previous scheme for 54 dwellings that members considered last year. This is obviously a matter of disagreement between the applicants and officers, but officers' advice is the level of harm remains the same, and although the development has been reduced here, it doesn't reduce that heritage harm at all than the previous scheme. What we do with that heritage harm is obviously very important in our planning balance, as required by paragraph 193 of the NPPF. And as I said earlier, we need to consider the public benefits, which I'll do so as I get towards the conclusion of this presentation. Now, just to go through the flood risk matter in a little more detail, on the screen now, this is the previous layout of development and the previous flood risk assessment. And the issue we had, as you'll see from the top of the slide here, we had development proposed within flood zone 2 and 3, and we also had works to almost re-engineer the flood zones to make the flood zones, the floodwater move into this area and collect here. Both of those matters meant that the site engage the sequential test, which is a requirement under the NPPF, to try and find whether there would be a site more suitable elsewhere that doesn't involve development in those high-risk flood zones. And there are other sites where planning permission has been granted but hasn't yet started, so the site failed the sequential test. And this is what happened after members saw the application last time at committee. So the only way we could address this is by moving development outside of the flood zone, which is what applicants have proposed. So this slide is just transitioning now to the new layout. So this is the new proposed layout, and as you'll see, all the development has been pulled out of the flood zone. And so there is only a footpath being proposed through that flood zone now, and obviously some of the open space. Now, I appreciate members also consider that this flood zone is still quite close to the development, but we obviously have to consider in policy terms whether this is acceptable or not. And all of the development that would lead to flood risk to people or property has been moved out of that flood zone. And so the intentions of our core strategy policy 15 and the NPPF to protect people against flooding, we consider has been met. Now, The site still is within flood zone 2 and 3 because the red line still goes around the site here. There is no denying that, and so the site still does require the sequential test. But we don't consider it is reasonable to refuse the application on the basis of the site being in this close proximity to the flood zone now, as all development has been pulled out of that flood zone and the risk to people and property has been removed. So as detailed in the committee report, we don't feel that this is a strong reason that would withstand appeal if the application was refused on that basis. So the flood zone flood risk assessment of the site is that it is on balance acceptable now in flood risk terms. Just to draw on the emerging joint local plan, the plan currently has limited weight in the decision-making process for a planning application, but I just wanted to show what was happening in the surrounding area with the JLP. The application site is shown in blue, and it is not included as a potential site that the council is looking to allocate. But over the road, there is a site which is currently being promoted by Pigeon. The site application boundary is slightly larger than this. I will show you it on a subsequent slide, but they're looking to promote land opposite this application site. And then we have a site also being proposed by Hopkins Home to the south of Bramford. So we just move up. And also a site to the north of Bramford where planning permission has been granted already. And here we have Wolsey Grange to the south, obviously. And then in blue we have the employment areas, Sproughton, and the employment on Wolsey Grange as well. So just to look at the sites around the application site in a little bit more detail and to draw on the highway impacts. We had considered with the Highway Authority the other proposed developments coming forwards, and this was reported to the last committee to members as well, that a cumulative highway assessment had been undertaken by all the applicants in the area. I'll just run through which applicants they are. So that site to the north of Bramford for 190 dwellings, which has planning permission. The site for 115 dwellings, which is currently being considered, an application put in by Hopkins Homes as well, on land to the south of Fitzgerald Road. 114 dwellings submitted by Pigeon on land to the north of Birstall Road. And this application site. So all of these applications came together to consider their cumulative highway impact, and a number of highway mitigation measures were identified and secured through planning contribution through Section 106 agreement, as they have been for the permission that has already been granted and as it's recommended to on this site. And so this application would in effect pay pro rata into that Section 106 pot to bring forward the highway improvements, which are along the B1113 and are detailed in the committee report. So just to bring the application to conclusion, final summary, the members have resolved previously on the previous layout, but the layout has been amended to try and address the reason for refusal and flood risk, as we have been trying to work positively and proactively with the applicants, as is identified in our core strategy in Policy 1, to try and refine down reasons for refusal. There have been no changes in material last application was presented to members. So by this I mean that our 5-year land supply position is still the same, that we had a 5-year land supply then and we still have a 5-year land supply now. The same level of heritage harm officers consider was proposed in the previous scheme as in the current scheme, and all other material considerations have remained the same in planning terms, and so it's difficult for officers to recommend different to the previous of approval, but obviously it is for members to consider how they wish to resolve and how they wish to balance the matters being presented in this application. So we have conflict with the core strategy as development is outside of the development boundaries identified under core strategy policy 2. The proposals are in broad compliance in officers' opinions with the key policies of CS11 and CS15 of our development plan. CS11 enabling development outside hinterland villages if it meets the criteria of that policy, and CS15 the criteria of sustainable development. There is a heritage impact of a medium level of less than substantial harm, which officers have taken to be a serious matter when coming to the balance in their recommendation. but it's considered that in this instance, because this site is in a good location within the district, a sustainable location, it has good benefits of full policy compliant affordable housing, and also the other benefits, obviously just generally providing housing and ecology net gain. It's considered that in this instance that all those matters together, when balanced against the heritage impact, that they do overcome the heritage impact, and the public benefits of the scheme outweigh that heritage impact in this instance. Also, the infrastructure and highways matters adequately addressed to the satisfaction of all of the statutory consultees and the Suffolk County Council Infrastructure and Highway Authority, and all other matters are adequately addressed as identified in the committee report. So on balance, this proposed development of 49 dwellings is considered to be a sustainable form of development. The recommendation from officers is for approval as it is detailed on page 45 to 46 of the agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, can you hear us?
Councillor Hinton, it's Joe here. I can hear you, but I haven't heard anything from the chair yet, so we'll just see what's happening.
Hello there. Is there anybody there?
in this meet? Is anybody in this meeting?
Hello, Councillor Hinton. It's Ian. Councillor Hinton, it's Ian. I can hear you. Ian Dupre. I heard Joe a moment ago. Joe Hobbs.
Could I just confirm, Ian, that you heard the end of my all the way to the end of my presentation?
Indeed, Mrs. Hobbs, I did. Yes.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. So Mandy's going to. I'll ask my colleague Mandy to ring Cat the chair to find out about what is going on. So what I would propose, just until we make contact with the chair or the chair comes back to the meeting, is we just take a very quick adjournment until we can re-establish contact with the chair.
Okay, let's contact with Peter.
Agreed. Thank you, Rob. Mr. Carmichael. Audio.
AU. DIO. It's Peter telling us that.
Will we be taking a break at 8 o'clock tonight to go out and clap for the NHS?
I have nothing on my screen at all.
Councillor McLaren, I had taken the presentation down. I will just put it back up if just to check that you can still see it. I just took it down whilst I wasn't talking.
Am I the only one that's cut off then?
I've just started the presentation back up again.
Okay, I can see that, but everything else has gone.
Okay.
That's all right, Mary. I think you're okay. You're in the same boat as everybody. I think it's useful keeping the presentation up because I certainly would like to work towards it when we ask questions and that.
Yeah,
okay.
Agree, Dave. Yeah, okay.
Councillor Osborne, it's Claire here. Can I just confirm that you can hear us now?
Yeah, morning, Claire. Yes, everything is back as it was. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Jim.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Right, I
Got to German now, yeah.
Yeah.
Just very quiet for a while.
keep you on the phone for a moment. All right, I'll just talk. Right, I've got public speaking, slide 46 up, and Claire Philpott. Can members hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah.
Right, I don't know what happened. I didn't touch anything. But are all members back? Are all members back?
Yes.
Yes, I'm here.
Right.
Yes.
Then Mary, I'll disconnect you here. Okay, I'll turn this phone off. Right. Right, members. Right, let's. If you can still all hear me, does any member wish to have any points clarified by the case officer? Councillor Ayres, I'll start with you, but if anybody else wants to speak, perhaps they'll type it in the chat box. Not a debate at this moment. Is there any points you just want?
No, I think the presentation was wonderful. Thank you.
Good, good. No one's typed in the box, so I will move now to public speakers.
Peter,
Yeah.
John Hinton has got something he wants to ask.
John Hinton, you want to ask something, do you?
Yes, please, Mr. Chair.
It didn't come up in the box, but not to worry, I've got you now, yep.
It's a bit slow sometimes. The wonders of broadband. Just a couple of questions from the officer concerning the report. Yep. On page 18, it notes doctor's surgeries being insufficient, and then talking about 2.5 mile radiuses. There are two surgeries. It doesn't say what the direct route, the actual road route might be to those surgeries, and certainly there's nothing in the report about anything to do with mitigating measures or anything like that. Could the officer elaborate a bit on that?
Those 2 points. Can you clarify, Joe?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, the comment on page 18 is a direct extract from the NHS England's comments on the application, and the response to your question is that the healthcare provision would be provided through a SIL payment. So a SIL bid would be made to then increase the capacity as the NHS saw fit and provide that healthcare. Obviously, that's not precisely detailed at the moment, but we have no objection from NHS England, and they consider that with SIL payment, they could provide the appropriate healthcare needs for those future residents.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, does that need adding into the recommendations? That would be the first comeback on that. And the second point that I'd just like clarifying at this point is the officer mentioned the overall traffic plan for covering Bramford, Wolsey Grange, and everybody else. Total of about 1,000 plus houses, but there's no mention within the report on page 19, for instance, of what is going to happen to traffic through the actual existing street of Sproughton, where we all know that there is traffic chaos at the moment.
Case Officer Joe.
Okay, thank you. To take those points in turn, we don't generally put the SIL requirements in the recommendation, only the Section 106 requirements, but perhaps we could make a note, I can take advice on that, whether we could just make a note in the minutes to make it clear that healthcare would be paid through SIL. And on the second point, the traffic impact on the streets within Sproughton, that has been thoroughly considered by the Highway Authority through the application. And part of those mitigation works that I mentioned would look to ensure that there are no adverse impacts from this development, which is obviously all we can consider today, is whether this development would make the existing situation any worse. With the highway improvements that I identified to be secured through Section 106, and as detailed in the recommendation, the Highway Authority considered that this development would be acceptable. So it has been considered the existing street network, but as I say, we can only consider the impact of this development on the existing traffic levels and not potentially look at the existing problems within Sproughton and look to necessarily solve those. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just come back, it talks about 3 mitigating measures, one of which is the zebra crossing, and I'm near the Wild Man, and I can't see that is actually going to do much to sort out the parking and general traffic flow problems on the main part of the street. Then talks about Birstall Lane, Lower Street Junction. Well, that's avoiding that street bottleneck again as well, and the Beagle roundabout, of course, is quite a long way away from that street as well, and traffic's got to go through that hazard of the street before it gets to the Beagle roundabout. So it hasn't really looked at what happens between the Wild Man, if you like, and the Beagle in terms of traffic. So it does seem a bit strange. And just to come back on the health provision, to have health provision from SIL is a little bit of a joke, for the simple reason that we're talking now on this particular application of something like, where are my figures? I've got them here somewhere. Oh yes, £425,000 of SIL requirements from a development of 49 houses, where only 32 of them will be liable for SIL. So the drain on the overall SIL pot for the whole district, it would be quite considerable. And I have to say that NHS England have shown their, shall we say, their limitations during this COVID-19.
Right, John, I'm going to come in there because I think we've been very patient and the points of clarification have been answered. I think you're getting more to debate question points, so I think we need to move on, and you can bring that up when we get into debate to pursue that if you so wish. Members, is there anybody else that wanted anything clarified? No, there's nothing in the...
Chairman, I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah, point of clarification, yeah.
Yes. That current slide shows the footpath that's proposed through the site near to the river. Was there a previous footpath through the site that the public could access that walk?
No, the site currently isn't publicly accessible on this side of the river. The public right-of-way is the other side of the river, just off this slide.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other member with points for clarification?
Yes, please, Chairman.
Councillor McCann. Yep.
Thank you. Can I speak to Joe? Yeah, thank you. Joe, I'd like to just clarify. I did some homework on this flooding. I've never come across this in my sort of short experience. And I was wondering about the explanation what was a floodplain. And according to the expert, it's where the river and the land side of it is on the same level. Considering that, and it's a very small area, I understand, the head of the Environment Agency, Sir James Bevan, has said that building new homes on floodplains should be resisted if at all possible. Is that your view?
Yes, obviously the guidance that we are required to follow is considering whether the site is in development on floodplains, and as my earlier slide showed, that all the development would be outside of the higher risk flood zones 2 and 3. It's all within flood zone 1, which is land, so even the highest mountain in the UK is technically flood zone 1. It's those higher risk flood zones of 2 and 3 which we are looking to keep the development outside of, and so this development isn't within those higher risk flood zones now with this revised scheme, and so it wouldn't be built on the floodplain which was shown in blue, just where I'm kind of hovering the mouse at the moment. Does that answer the question?
Yep. Well,
yes,
I think you can come back in debate in that.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other points of clarification? No? Thank you. Then, members, we're going to move to public speakers. As both of the applications are for the same site, the public speaking arrangements have been agreed that the Parish Council will have 6 minutes to speak. That's 2 3 minutes for objectors, supporters, participants, and the ward members have 10 minutes. Okay, so I don't know why it keeps echoing, but anyway. I will ask the parish representative, Helen Davis, to speak. You have 6 minutes in which to address the committee. At the end of that time, I will ask members if they've got any questions for you. Thank you. I'll go over to Rob, the officer, to set the time and invite you to speak.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Sproughton Parish Council objects to this application. In fact, there are over 250 objections to this application from Sproughton residents. It was refused by yourselves last year, and the reasons for refusal have not gone away. We strongly believe that it should be considered in the context of the multitude of sites and applications coming forward along the Gipping corridor, contributing to an almost continuous ribbon of development along the B113. The original draft joint local plan identified 4 possible sites between Sproughton and Bramford. However, 3 of these sites have already been submitted and are at the public consultation stage before the new JLP has been issued. Another infill site has been submitted as of this January, not included in Joe's slide, which will leave a 15-metre strip of green between the Sproughton Hopkins Homes site and Bramford sites. If this doesn't meet the definition of creeping coalescence, we don't know what does. The existing adopted local plan policies should take precedence, the draft JLP being some way away from completion. The NPPF specifically warns against creeping coalescence. With the approval of Bennett Homes, 30 houses, and Wolsey Grange, 475 houses, a significant chunk of the 20-year local housing need has already been approved and greatly exceeds the demand captured in our September 19 Housing Needs Survey. If this application is approved, taking into account those already approved, this will double the size of the parish. This application is not needed. Also, the application is on an unallocated site, as per the draft JLP, and outside the built-up settlement boundary of the village. There are already enough sites allocated to Sproughton within the draft JLP, so this is a purely speculative application. We are now working on a neighbourhood plan, so we'll be considering suitable sites. This is unlikely to be one of them. Other specifics we would like to mention: infrastructure. We are concerned about the lack of provision for infrastructure, especially in respect of health, education and travel. There are no nearby GP surgeries with space. Sproughton Primary School is full. Our local shop is voluntary. Both the NPPF and local policies dictate that development needs to consider provision of infrastructure in order to be sustainable. SCC strategic planning has called for a master plan for the area so that the cumulative impacts and needs can be properly assessed. We agree. Wildlife. There are proven animal corridors across Lorraine Way which connect several woodlands and the Gipping Valley as a whole. There is no provision for either wildlife corridors or ensuring the protection of local animal species, including protected species. Traffic. Traffic volumes along the B1313 are already high. The assessment fails to take into account the cumulative effects of other planned developments in Bramford, Pinewood, Belstead, Great Blakenham, Hadley and Sudbury, to which this development would contribute. We were shocked when we learned of a proposed no parking clearway through the narrow Sproughton High Street. This is part of a package of suggested changes, none of which we have been consulted on, even 12 months on. Traffic measures need to be implemented that calm traffic through Sproughton to protect residents, not speed it up. Flooding. Each winter, the River Gipping floods to a greater or lesser extent onto the surrounding fields in Bramford and Sproughton. We have had unprecedented levels of rain this past winter, and the area around the Gipping has flooded more than normal. We can no longer regard these events as one-offs, given climate change predictions. These predictions have not been factored into the way flood assessments are currently done. It's not just local rainfall that contributes to flooding, it's the rainwater runoff from further upstream where new housing developments will funnel the water into the river when it cannot be absorbed into the ground. Given this development is close to the river, there is a real risk that this development, as well as other parts of Sproughton, could be flooded in the future. Heritage, something that's been mentioned a lot. The northern village boundary is formed by a collection of listed buildings all set within a special landscape area. This heritage-rich rural edge is treasured by the village and has remained untouched for several hundred years. The 2015 Babergh Landscape Character Type Report recommends development should be on plateau farmland, typically along the A1071, in preference to rolling valley farmland, which this is. Hopkins have attempted to consider the wider views and setting of the Grade 2 buildings. Sproughton Hall, Tithe Barn, Root Barn, Church Close, All Saints Parish Church, together with their interaction across the site with the historic listed buildings in the wider landscape. However, we feel they have failed as the revised layout still completely intrudes on the important heritage views. In addition, the designs do not blend in with the existing buildings. In fact, the revised layout shows the new houses to be closer to Sproughton Hall and the Root Barn than before. Historic England guidance set out in the setting of heritage assets makes clear that having identified assets affected by a development and their significance, it is necessary to minimise harm. This development is the opposite and breaches policy CN06, which states that any development should be of appropriate scale, form, siting and detailed design to harmonise with the existing heritage buildings and its setting, and also contrary to policy CS15 of the core strategy, which states that any new development should respect existing heritage assets. We do not feel that the arguments for this development are sufficiently compelling to ignore the harm to heritage assets. In summary, the reasons you rejected this application last time round still stand, and we ask that you refuse this application again. Thank you.
Councillor Beale.
Councillor Beale.
Is everyone else still in the meeting? Can I just confirm there's a couple of councillors just let me know that they're still here?
Yes, Robert.
Okay. Right.
Yes, still here, Robert.
I'm still here.
Yes, Robert.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yes, Robert.
Mandy, could you please contact Councillor Beer again, please? if he hasn't already done so. So if we just wait again, I'd ask members to just mute their microphones until we just can reconnect with the chair. Thank you.
Can you hear me now, Rob? Well,
We can
why
hear
are
you.
we losing it? Because this is, I'm not doing anything.
I don't
Rob,
know, Chair,
did you
I'm
manage to?
afraid.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Chair. I don't have an
Hello?
answer to your question, though, I'm afraid.
Oh, right. Sorry. Then, what I was going to say, the progress bar it went well over 6 minutes. I asked you to mute, but obviously you couldn't hear me. So I think we have to add a minute on to other people to speak if they want to use that time. I don't know if you managed to time at your end at all.
Yes, Chair, it was exactly 6 minutes.
It was, but mine closed down at 6 minutes.
No, hello, Chair. It's legal here. I saw it as being 6 minutes exactly as well, like Mr. Carmichael. So,
Right. Well, then you need to tell me that in future because mine showed as not that she'd ran out of the 6 minutes long before then. So I must ignore mine. I'll rely on yours. So my apologies to Mrs. Davis. Okay, we seem to be back up and running again. Members, is there any questions to the speaker, Helen Davis? Anybody? No? You can all hear me? Okay, thank you very much.
Chair, it's Councillor Parker here. I did just type in the pane. I do have a question, Chair, if I'm allowed.
Can I just answer that? It certainly isn't coming up that anyone's typed in, so you will need just to bring your attention to me. Okay, Councillor Parker?
You might need to open the chat box on the left, possibly.
I thought I'd done that. Let's have a look. Right. It's got smaller and everything. Can you still hear me?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair, and just like to thank Mrs. Davis as well for her presentation. It was excellent and clear. But I do have one question, Mrs. Davis. You mentioned that you are in the process of forming your neighbourhood plan. Could you just inform us at what stage you are at as a parish council with that, please?
Yes, I can. Thank you. We kicked this off at the beginning of the year. We have confirmed that the area boundary is the parish boundary, and we are now thinking about our public consultation.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions to to Helen Davis?
Just a quick one, please, Mr.
Councillor Hinton.
Mrs. Davis, thanks very much. I agree with Councillor Parker, an excellent presentation. Just one quick question. Have you requested or have received any sort of traffic surveys from the Highways Authority as to traffic flows?
No, we haven't seen anything, and we would dearly like to be able to contribute to that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No one's in the box. Thank you, Mrs. Davis. Then we'll move on to our next public speaker, which is an objector. Martin Levitt, you have 3 minutes in which to address the committee. So when you're ready.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair.
Sorry, just before you start, can I just point out to Mr. Carmichael that I cannot see the bar line for whatever reason, so please, if we get to the end of the time, will you then tell me? Thank you. Carry on, Mr. Martin Levitt.
Thank you very much indeed. Every 4 seconds that I speak, one more house will be built on that open greenfield site until 49 properties dominate and remove the historic context and setting of the existing cluster of the 8 related Grade 2 listed heritage assets situated along the northern village settlement boundary. Those 8 listed buildings are heritage assets which date back from the 16th century. And if I may, I'll refer to Mrs. Hobbs's slides because they articulate very well the consistent concerns expressed by the Heritage Officer in 2018, 2019 and 2020. Nothing's changed at all. Slide 6 and slide 7 show the setting and the rarity of those 8 assets within the village because they're along the northern edge of the brown-coloured settlement boundary. And the settlement of the cluster of the 8 related 16th century assets is important because when taken together, either individually or collectively, they represent the historic and the cultural relationship that each had with one another, and also the open space across the development site known as Cardinal Field. Now that open space field cannot be divorced from the setting and the integrity of those heritage assets or their visual prominence. And the rarity these days of tranquility shows the field's open space providing a positive contribution to the significance of the asset setting and the ability to appreciate them from long views. If you look at slide 27, it shows the impact and the scale of the proposed site, extending northwards by at least a third of a kilometre and well outside the village settlement boundary. The slide also demonstrates how the built environment can swamp and dominate and destroy the long views and the loss of visual appreciation of the setting of the 8 buildings. Slide 28 shows 4 anonymous blocks representing the closely associated Grade 2 buildings, and the slide also shows how much closer the development clutter is and how it actually dominates the setting of the listed buildings, especially when you compare it with slide 10. And that's graphically shown along the long views of the field towards the settlement boundary and the listed buildings. So it's overwhelmingly apparent that the adverse impact which this development will have on those 8 Grade 2 heritage assets is substantial and cannot be underestimated. This adverse impact significantly outweighs any benefits when assessed against the NFPP policy, particularly paragraph 196. And that's why the Planning Committee, sitting on the 17th of April last year, resolved that substantial harm would be caused by the development, which didn't respect the setting of those listed buildings. Okay, so the level of the heritage impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levitt. I'll just see if there's any questions for you from members. I'll start with Councillor Ayres. Have you any questions? Anybody else can tap in the box.
No questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Sorry, yes, please, can I just ask Mr. Levitt what his views are of the footpath that now runs through that site and alongside the barns?
Well, it runs across the boundary edge of Sproughton Hall, and it goes right in front of the root barn, and therefore is visual from all aspects of the buildings. It's never been there. It's one that's been purposely created as a route through from Lorraine Way to Lower Street. Lower Street of itself is busy, and if there's a congregation of a number of people, particularly school children, I can see and foresee the inevitable accidents.
Thank you. Any other member wishing to speak? There's nothing in the box. No. Thank you very much then, Mr. Levitt. I will now ask Objector Rowena Jeremiah to speak. You have 3 minutes in which to address the committee. Over to you when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Rona Jermin and I'm Chair of the Sproughton Working Group and Chair of the newly formed Sproughton Neighbourhood Planning Team. The cumulative growth impact on infrastructure generated by 8 housing developments in a 5-mile corridor along the Gipping Valley has been immeasurably underestimated. The number of houses proposed for Sproughton is potentially 3,370. 505 of those have already been built or approved, and we currently have 581 houses in our parish. We have nearly doubled our parish community already. Our housing needs survey in 2019 identified a need for 87 additional people. With another 310 plus in Bramford 1 mile away already approved, this creeping coalescence and ribbon development results in an unsustainable cumulative impact on our infrastructure, heritage, biodiversity, landscape and local amenities. You have seen and walked Lower Street and Lorraine Way, both historic narrow roads of our village. It is unsustainable. Policy CS7, Strategic Site Allocation, Ipswich Babergh Fringe, clearly states a master plan will be required which should ensure the separate identity and avoid creeping coalescence with adjacent settlements. With regard to the highways reports for all these developments, they are flawed by inconsistent data capture and analysis that have been strategically engineered to support the multitude of poorly thought through schemes. Changing the Beagle roundabout and putting in 2 zebra crossings will not solve the problem of 2,000 extra homes, with an average of 2 cars per household. Forget not that we are a rural area and people have to travel to shop, work or go to school. We are a through passage between Hadley and Ipswich. The strategic development of Hindland Villages, CS11, proves this site is not sustainable. This site does not identify with or offer to support the rural community, local services or facilities. It is physically an urban development in a rural setting, and most shockingly, a modern site along the Gipping Valley at the entrance to our village, causing substantial impact harm to our heritage landscape. Most importantly, it does not comply with government guidance. The effect of the development on the character and appearance of the area will change the village character forever and create an urbanising effect, particularly as it is in close proximity to listed buildings and the open countryside, resulting in material harm with substantial historic landscape impact. This is objectionable because the NPPF paragraph 47 implies that this is not a key site critical to the delivery of the housing strategy, for example, like Wolsey Grange 1 and 2. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Members, I'll start with Sue Ayres. Do you have any questions, Councillor, for the last speaker?
No, thank you.
Any other member? No. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair, can I just ask a quick question?
Sorry. Yeah, Councillor Busby.
Hi, is there any element of the housing need for Sproughton that isn't being met by the two developments that are already there?
None. They've all been met.
Thank you. Any other member question? No.
Could I just, Councillor Parker again, Chair, could I just jump in on that very point then, please?
Yes.
Because Mr. German made mention of the housing needs survey. How many responses did you receive to that housing needs survey?
That's something I haven't got my hands on at the moment. I'd have to submit that to Joe to add to the minutes later.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, if I might just comment, there was comment made of, I think the comment was dubious data. So it would be useful to know that if the neighbourhood plan group are using that themselves as an argument, perhaps. Just a comment. Thank you.
Yeah, your major point, I think, there, Councillor Parker. Any other
Chair,
questions?
if I may just interrupt on that point, just as a point of governance clarity, is that anything that is submitted after can't be added into the minutes, obviously, because the minutes are a record of the meeting. If it is to be displayed publicly online, that's perfectly acceptable, but it would not, any details that aren't discussed at the meeting won't be recorded in the minutes. Thank you, Chair.
No, I think, thank you very much for that. I think the members are aware.
Councillor Beer, if this is Helen Davies, may I interrupt because I have pulled up the housing needs survey.
I'm sorry, you've spoken.
Sorry, Chairman, I think it's illegal here. I think if Mrs. Davis is saying she's now in a position to answer a question that she was struggling with a few seconds ago, but she's found something, I think we ought to let her give a full answer. That's my advice.
Right, okay, I will accept that. Helen, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, sorry, I have to move slightly away from this computer to another computer, so I hope you still can hear me.
I can still hear you, yep.
Right. The total number of surveys that were distributed was 600. The surveys that were returned were 165 and not completed or returned blank were 435. So 27.5% of the parish responded.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for that. I hope that helps, Councillor Parker.
It does, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Any other questions to the last speaker? No. Thank you very much then. We'll move on. I will now ask the applicant agent to speak, Chris Smith and Paul Sutton. You have 6 minutes to address the committee when you're ready. Thank you. Hello? Hello? Have we lost you all again?
Chairman, I'm here. My colleague Paul Sutton was due to speak first, I believe.
Sorry, I am here. I thought you were going first, Chris.
Right, well, perhaps you'll sort it out between you and one of you speak now. Thank you.
Right, I'll go first then, Chris.
Yes, Paul. Thanks.
Hello? Okay. My name is Paul Sutton and I am an independent planning and heritage consultant with over 40 years experience in town planning and heritage matters, including as a principal conservation and design officer for a local planning authority. I'm also an associate member of the Institute of Historic Building Conservation. I'm acting for the applicants, Hopkins Homes, and I have been involved with this site since May 2017. We have listened to and acted upon the concerns expressed by members of this committee when the earlier proposals for 54 dwellings were considered in April last year. The scheme now comprises 49 dwellings, and the area of proposed public open space in the vicinity of the nearest listed buildings to the application site has been significantly enlarged. This would create an attractive landscaped open space bordered by footpaths, which would also help to preserve the key views of the adjacent listed buildings from within the centre of the site and at the entrance to it. Setting in the context of heritage assets is to a large extent a subjective concept. It is defined in the NPPF as the surroundings in which a heritage asset is experienced, and the detailed assessment work I have undertaken concludes that the impacts of the proposals are confined to the wider or extended settings of those listed buildings closest to the application site. I've also considered in detail the contribution that these wider settings make to the overall significance, both individually and collectively, of these heritage assets. The conclusions show there would be a negligible impact on the wider setting of Walnut Tree Cottage and Sproughton Hall, and a minor or low adverse impact on the wider setting of the Root Barn, Tithe Barn and the parish church. I believe that these minor impacts on the wider setting of these heritage assets constitute a low level of less than substantial harm to their overall significance. The planning officer's report notes that the proposals are likely to result in a medium level of less than substantial harm. The NPPF and Historic England guidance make no distinction over the varying levels of less than substantial harm, but clearly within this category, harm could be approaching, but just below, substantial, or at the other end of the scale, approaching no harm to their significance. The NPPF is clear that any level of less than substantial harm to the significance of a heritage asset should be weighed against the public benefits of the proposals, and I believe considerable, and these are set out in paragraphs 11.8 and 11.9 of the committee report. I have concluded the outcome of this balancing exercise is that those public benefits are considered to significantly outweigh the identified level of less than substantial harm, having given considerable importance and weight to the harm identified. The same conclusion has been reached by your planning officer. For all of the above reasons, I firmly believe that planning permission should be granted for the revised proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. My name's Chris Smith. I'm Development Planner for Hopkins Homes. As has been outlined by your officers since the scheme was last presented to your committee, the proposal has now been further amended to reduce the overall quantum of development from 54 dwellings down to 49 dwellings and increase the visual and physical separation from the previously identified heritage assets, notably Sproughton Hall to the east, in order to directly address the comments previously expressed by committee members. As you have heard, we've continued to work positively with your officers and are confident that these proposals now provide an attractive new development in a wholly sustainable location, delivering 17 much needed new affordable homes, substantial areas of new public open space and pedestrian walkways through the site, along with improved car parking facilities for the neighbouring community shop. Alongside these, all the requested financial contributions towards other essential infrastructure required from the development will be provided via the normal SIL and Section 106 procedures. If permission is forthcoming, we would aim to be on site by the end of this year, with the first homes being available for occupation by the end of next year. In summary, therefore, we hope that you can confer with your officer's recommendation that the proposals represent sustainable development and that you're able to support the grant of planning permission. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for that. Right, I'll now see if there's any questions. I'll go to Councillor Ayres. Do you have any questions you wish to ask the applicant or agent?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I would ask that the affordable homes, and according to your report, you said that they will be equivalent or the same sort of structures inside. Can you assure us of that? And secondly, will any of them be homes for life? Thank you.
Can you answer?
Yes, as has been mentioned by your officer in respect to the first point, the homes are tenure blind, therefore materials, detailing execution is of exactly the same standard externally as on the open market homes. And yes, so the affordable homes can be built to the Homes for Life standard.
Thank you. Councillor Lee Parker, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is a question to Mr. Sutton particularly. Mr. Sutton, good morning, welcome. Throughout within the presentation that our officer gave at the outset, there was a graph that was shown, and Joe, I don't know if you can find it. It was to do with the impact upon the heritage asset. It was a slide that I don't think we've seen within this committee before, and I'm just curious to know, what the scientific basis for that. There we go. Thank you, Joe. I'm curious to know what the scientific basis for that slide is, because I know our officer didn't really have a comment to make on it, but I think it's a crucial part, I think, of this presentation and the whole basis of this application. So could you explain that to us, please?
Yes, I can, Councillor, thank you. What that slide is an attempt to show is the wider setting of the heritage assets in the immediate vicinity of the site, which are shown in red. And setting, as I outlined in my presentation, is a subjective concept, there is no doubt, and I wouldn't argue that the lines themselves are etched in stone, but what they are an attempt to do is to identify as much about the difference between the immediate, what I would call the immediate setting, which generally speaking is taken to be the area within the immediate vicinity of the listed building, or its curtilage is another term, and the wider setting, which normally is the area that's well outside the curtilage of the building itself. Now, this is associated with views, because obviously if you can't see the heritage asset from a particular point, then it's very hard to say that actually that point is within the setting of a listed building. So it is based largely on a subjective analysis of where these buildings can be seen from within the wider area, and therefore to give some sort of feel and steer as to their wider setting of which the development has an impact. And we don't argue about it not having an impact, but the impact we both agree is less than substantial, and there is no official settings of whether it's high, low or medium of less than substantial harm. We believe it to be a low level of less than substantial harm. The council's conservation officer believes it to be a medium level of less than substantial harm. But that's essentially the basis for that drawing. And as you can see, it picks up on the wider view of the church tower from across the site, which has been designed in the sense that the footpath into the site for its whole length and walking across the public open space, you would still be able to see the church tower, the root barn and the tithe barn.
Thank you.
I hope that helps.
Thank you very much. I'm sure it does. I have three other councillors in line who wish to speak, so don't think I'm missing you yet. Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to ask, what are you doing to make the homes carbon neutral in line with government requirements, and also, is there any renewable energy generation on site? And finally, how are you giving a net gain to biodiversity, and also how would you measure that?
I think there's three questions there for you, sir.
In terms of the first question, yes, we have to use renewable technologies as standard in all our developments nowadays. So these will look at things like solar panels, measures to reduce carbon heat loss through built form, controls on boilers, etc. All various different mechanisms to try and achieve a net carbon reduction on the site and increase the overall sustainability and sustainable energy use on the site. So that's something that we have to do across the board. In terms of ecological and biodiversity gains, obviously, as I think you saw earlier, there is a draft landscaping strategy there, and as part of that, There'd be an associated landscape and ecology management plan, which would detail the various ecological enhancements that we can do on site, things like bat boxes, bird boxes. We've got additional planting on site, as shown indicatively on here, further trees, improving hedgerows, etc., and increased management of the other grassland, all of which will enable biodiversity and ecological enhancements over time compared to the current use.
Thank you. Councillor Busby.
Thanks. Yeah, you presumably spoke with our heritage officers. Did they suggest a layout or a design that they would be happy with?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yes, we did have a meeting. It was a little bit frustrating because we talked about setting at length and did try and put a line on a map, but unfortunately Dr. Duck wouldn't be drawn on putting a line on a map, and to a large extent that reflects the very subjective nature of trying to assess wider setting, and it probably isn't possible to put a distinct line on a map, but what it is possible to do, I think, is to try and assess the area within which the heritage asset is experienced, which is the definition in the MPPF, and that is largely based around places from which you can see those buildings. So yes, we have engaged. Unfortunately, it's probably fair to say we agreed to disagree, although we did agree that obviously it was a level of less than substantial harm, and not anything more substantial harm.
Thank you.
Can I just follow that up? Sorry. Did you not consider that a development of single-storey buildings would mitigate the harm on the heritage assets?
We did, and in fact the revised layout shows that on two sides of the new open space that's proposed, there would be bungalows, which reflects the existing bungalow closest to the root barn, and there's houses on one side. So we have tried to do that, and as I say, there are bungalows on two sides of that open space, although I have to say that in terms of historic character, of course, bungalows aren't a particularly dominant feature of the historic interest of the core of the village. So houses, two-storey buildings tend to be a better model to use if you are trying to blend in with the heritage of the area.
Thank you. Councillor Ayres, you wanted to come back.
Yes, I'm really concerned. The answer that I had from Chris was the external part of the buildings, and I've actually visited, I won't name a site of another development, where the affordable housing had concrete floors, but the ones where they were purchased by a buyer actually had parquet. Can you come in there, please?
Yeah, sorry, I just targeting the externals because obviously that's the thing that was shown on the slide, but no, equally internally the build standard will be exactly the same. If anything, sometimes the build standard and the fit out that we have to do for affordable homes is enhanced because the specification that the various registered social landlords ask for is above that we would otherwise normally provide for a market house, where essentially a potential purchaser likes to have the options to obviously fit out the house internally how they would like to, but so it wasn't intended to allude that they're in any way inferior. So if anything, the affordable homes are built to or kitted out, if you like, to a higher standard internally than the market ones.
Thank you. That was a good question, Councillor Ayres. Councillor Hinton, you have a question.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions really. Firstly, can you explain to us why the major part of the road network within the site you're proposing is unadopted, especially as most of it seems to go near to the affordable housing, and who will be responsible for maintaining it? And secondly, on slide 38 it showed some exterior views of the affordable housing and the market housing to show how they blended together, or had similar appearances. It appeared that the market houses had a smaller footprint than the affordable houses. So can you explain just what the actual accommodation size of the affordable houses versus the marketing houses is, and that we're not just seeing some tiny little houses where you have a job to put the bed down on the floor, it has to sort of stand up against the wall to get it into a bedroom.
Very good. Can you help?
Yes, certainly. In terms of the aspect of the house sizes, obviously all our houses now we look to design to the national prescribed space standards, so that sets out those space standards that we have to provide there. In terms of the affordable houses, some of those have a slightly larger footprint because there is a requirement to provide X number of bed spaces per given affordable house. So some of those might have to provide a double bedroom rather than a single bedroom, for example. Therefore, the bedrooms will be slightly larger in some of those. Therefore, the footprint is on some of those is slightly larger. So that's the only reason why. All our houses, obviously, we build an awful lot of houses, and obviously, we have to build them all to a suitable size in order for a potential purchaser to be comfortable to buy one. So there's certainly nothing undersized about either of the houses, and certainly the affordable houses, there are additional requirements specified by both your housing officer and the registered social landlords over bedroom sizes, which obviously we have to meet in order to be able to hand those over to the housing associations in question. I'm sorry, I forgot there was another part of the question you asked before that.
Yes, about adoption of the roads.
Adoption of the roads, again, the roads, as Joe has shown on there, the main spine roads through the site, both of those will be adopted by the Highway Authority. The one, if you like, on the right-hand side, the lighter yellow one is a standard adopted tarmac road. We then lead down to a slightly secondary, if you like, in highway engineers terms, road that goes off and goes to the end of the site, and that serves the vast majority of the affordable housing there, with an adoptable turn and head at the end, which also serves the Anglian Water to be adopted pumping station. Beyond that, the other houses on the site are served by lesser shared surface roads. They're still of an adoptable standard. It's simply the fact that because of the numbers of houses that those particular cul-de-sacs, if you like, serve, that they're not of a size that the Highway Authority would normally be willing to adopt. Therefore, they're shown as shared driveways, which are in joint shared ownership. And again, this is common practice throughout a number of our developments, and they work well, and they seem popular. And so at the end of the day, the Highway Authority are not willing to adopt those type of roads anyway.
Okay. I have a question from Dave Busby. You want to come back again?
Yes, question. But having got this slide up, I think it's probably answered the question. It was, do the flats have any private garden?
The flats don't have any individual private garden, but obviously they all overlook a rather large area of new public open space, so they have directly accessible public open space to utilise.
Thank you.
Okay, well, sorry.
Yep, go on.
We had this problem before with an application in Cable for some flats, in terms of where people would dry clothes. If it's all well and good having public space, which is great, but you wouldn't want 8, 9, 10 washing lines full of clothes sprawled around all over this green area unless it's part of their garden.
No, so there's a communal area of open space to the north that you can see sort of shown in a triangular shape there. So there is areas that can be utilised for that purpose. It's just that that would be a shared area rather than a private area for each individual property. But so there is an area that those requirements understandably could take place without obviously having clearly not utilising the public open space to do so.
Thank you.
Could I just come in, Chair, quickly, just to help clarify a point?
Councillor, yes,
It's
Joe.
Joe, sorry.
Yep.
Just showing the current slide we've got. We did have this discussion with our colleagues in strategic housing about these proposed flats, and you can just see from the slightly shaded areas here, each flat does have a balcony space which is covered but open, where they would be able to have perhaps a more private area to say dry clothes and such like. So that was discussed, and obviously they are quite small units, 1-bedroom flats each, so the amount of amenity space required potentially per resident is smaller, but they do have those covered outdoor space balconies for each unit.
Thank you very much. I don't have any other councillors. Councillor Jameson, you wish to come back?
Yeah, with respect to the affordable rented properties, is there one way you group them not only close together but also closer to the floodplain? Is there any thoughts on? Is there any reason why they weren't positioned wider across the development space?
No, I think in terms of the provision of the affordable housing, as your officers alluded to, that we try to make sure they're not all in one group. They are in two groups. Registered social landlords generally like them to be in groups for management purposes and for sort of legal and those kind of purposes. In terms of where those groups are, it was more of a design thing that obviously, as we've alluded to, the small units grouped together there then have the benefit of a rather large area of new public open space and quite a decent outlook, towards the countryside beyond to the north and east and towards the river there, and also sort of help to frame the development in that area. So it was more of a design thing than the actual tenure of the building that chose the location of the built forms in that area.
Thank you for that. Councillor Jemison, the Planning Committee has, over its period of time, come out there against grouping all affordable homes in one spot. We tend to prefer them dotted about more. We don't always get that, but it's on this particular application. I haven't anybody else who's wishing to ask a question. So with that, I will assume that nobody else has got any more questions. So we will now move on to the next speaker, which is the County Council Division Member, Councillor Krista Hudson, to speak. You, sir, have 6 minutes to address the committee on County Council issues regarding this application. Thank you. Councillor Hudson?
Jolly good.
Yep.
Jolly good. Yes, good morning, and good morning, colleagues, and good morning, members of the public as well. What I wanted to say, Mr. Chairman, is that I remain very much a doubting Thomas on this application. I'd like to thank the officers for their extensive work in this, but the reasons for my being a doubting Thomas are as follows. I believe that the development is still unsustainable. There are no changes in the material facts from the last opportunity that arose when your committee deemed it necessary to refuse. Obviously, I don't want to go into too much of what has already been said, Mr. Chairman, to waste your time. But obviously, being outside the village envelope and outside the JLP is a big problem. I'm very concerned about the relevant nature of the locality. And what I mean by that, of course, Mr. Levitt referred to various particular settings there, and I think with regard to the heritage of the area, in my opinion, and indeed probably in many others' opinion, we would be tending to blight the area, and the last thing we all want to do is to blight residents' enjoyment of an area. I believe that certainly environmental degradation is very much in my mind at the moment. I'm thinking of the pollution levels that have been taken quite widely, Mr. Chairman, at the Wild Man. I understand there have been readings there, and indeed the amount of traffic that would be generated. It really seems to me that Sproughton is being blighted by having far too many houses in far too tight a nature of places. It really seems to be bombarded. It's an urban sprawl. It's joining up, as Mrs. Davis has said, 15 metres is hardly a good space, and it would seem that that's going to be joined up into a jumbled strip development, which I don't think is in anyone's interest. Pollution, as I say, from increased highway, air pollution, will be exacerbated, particularly through the rat run, which I don't like to use the expression rat run, Mr. Chairman, but I think it's so appropriate, and I know that people have referred to it. When one looks at the main street through Sproughton, I can think that a rat run is a good description of what's gone on there. Notwithstanding the whole thing, I know the traffic has to move. Tragically, we have had a loss of life along that road and probably some very near misses as well. And thinking about the people living along there and in the village generally, it really is not a good scene. I was very, very interested to hear Mrs. Davis from the parish talking about the health provision. Obviously, we talk about SIL, we talk about Section 106, but I was quite shocked and appalled to learn, of course, that not all SIL money has to be directed to any one village where, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm sure Mrs. Hobbs will, but any SIL or 106 money does not necessarily have to be spent in the villages affected. It could, if there were a greater need perceived elsewhere, be shifted way away to Sudbury or anywhere else within the purview of the council. So that's no guarantee that we would get the necessary and requisite infrastructure. It's obviously outside the boundaries, I say. Blighting this village then, because of its relevant locality heritage, the settings that we've heard about would create, in my opinion, a future blot on the landscape, to quote a hackneyed expression, but this would be a blot on the landscape. It isn't the only village where this is happening, but it really would be in this case. It seems to be that Sproughton is suffering from overdevelopment and developmental blight. I also feel I must bring to your attention, though I'm sure you'll be aware of it, Mr. Chairman, the massive downturn economically, sadly, that we're suffering at the moment should and could be, and probably is, something that we need to consider, because the development should not in any event be left empty. When I mean empty, I'm rather tired of hearing in Suffolk how many empty homes we have. It runs into the hundreds. It runs into the hundreds of thousands nationally, but in our patch, a lot of empty or indeed second homes. I personally don't think that we should give planning permission for second or empty homes. In other words, they're an investment, not somewhere to live. Whether that's a planning consideration, that will be for others to decide. And I believe it's essential that all members have been able to hear this morning. I know there have been a few hiccups, to hear the whole determination of your committee, and that's a very good thing. I welcome the opportunity to be invited to give my thoughts about it. But I wanted to say again, the financial situation, not only in Sproughton, but in the whole of the county, is now so economically depressed that I just wonder whether that goes to the heart of whether these homes are essential or will be. I know that's an unknowable, and they may well be sold, they may well be second homes, they may well be lived in. But at the moment, people seem to me to have all on to be able to keep a roof over their head, and I'm very, very wary of allowing more developments to be where there's no guarantee that they're going to be occupied. That's what we're trying to do. I'm also very concerned that we have the fourth emergency service, which I call broadband, and I know all new houses have to need broadband, particularly, for example, our meeting this morning.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor
Thank you so much.
It's always nice to listen to you, but you have used up all your 6 minutes.
I'm obliged to, Mr.
If you stay on the line, please, I'll see if there's any questions from members for you. I'll start with Councillor Ayres, and anybody else can tap in the box.
No questions, thank you, Chair.
No questions, thank you. There's nothing in the box or coming up. Thank you very much then, Councillor Hudson. We'll move on. There's no other questions for you. Right. Members will note that from the tabled papers, Councillor Norman has provided us with a statement on his views. He's one of the ward members. Can I confirm that all members have had the opportunity to read this in full? You've all read it?
Yeah, no problem.
Yes, read it in full.
Yes.
Yes.
Good, yes. Come through. Right. I will now ask the other ward member, Councillor Rick Hardacre to speak. You, sir, have 10 minutes in which to address the committee, and then I'll see if there's any questions at the end. Councillor Hardacre.
Hello. I don't think I'll manage a full 10 minutes.
Yes, you're on. Carry on.
Okay. The first thing I want to say is these people aren't NIMBYs. I've been to parish meetings and I've spoken to them, and I've seen them deal with planning applications and speak to them, and they do engage constructively. They're not just here, and I hope you gather that impression from today, that we're not just saying no to everything point blank. They have, I think they have valuable opinions and have done valuable research on that. Regarding this site specifically, I find it very interesting that the guidance given to councillors was that you can only consider this development in isolation. And the air quality report, sort of in tandem with that, says that this development is of a scale that is unlikely to compromise the existing good air quality in the area. Well, there's two sides to that. The first side is that, as Councillor Hudson just alluded to, the air quality is actually quite bad in the middle of Sproughton at the crossroads. And the second point is that if we're saying that we can only consider this development and it's only got a small impact on traffic and a small impact on air quality, then I find that very strange, because surely then if someone wants to build 500 houses, they just need to put in 10 applications for 50 houses, and each one will say this is only a small impact on traffic, this is only a small impact on air quality, this is only a small impact on ecology. And because we can only consider these developments individually, we feel bound to approve them all, and that just seems daft. We have to take these applications as a whole. We have to take the context in, especially when so many houses, several hundred, have already been given permission to be built. We have to take that into context, not the empty fields next door. We have to assume that those houses are there or will be there and having an influence. As many other people have mentioned, the highways, Suffolk Highways response may have taken into account some of these other developments, but for their recommendation to just be a zebra crossing or two doesn't actually address the traffic. It might make it easier to cross the road, but it doesn't address the traffic. Up here in Pinewood on Shepherd Drive, we have 250,000 traffic movements per month. That's 10,000 a day on a weekday, and we have a zebra crossing there that I use to get to the co-op, and people do not stop. They do not stop. You have to wait 2 or 3 cars for people to stop. And you know, how long before a school child gets killed because they run onto the zebra crossing and the people driving don't stop? So we have to think about these things, and traffic and sustainability. In terms of sustainability, we're told that what counts as a sustainable development means it's close to the Ipswich and it's close to the A14. But you can't get to Ipswich and the A14 because the roads are already full. You know, with all the extra development as well, the roads are going to get fuller. And what is the mitigation around that? Well, there is no mitigation around that, apart from a zebra crossing and maybe tweaking a roundabout. There's talk of hard paving the Gipping footpath into Ipswich to make that more accessible for cycling and walkers. But when's that going to happen? We don't know if and when that's going to happen. The buses are non-existent, practically. Maybe there are more houses that will get more buses. We don't know. Councillor Hudson also just referred to the broadband. We know that broadband isn't that great in Sproughton. The mobile signal isn't that great. And then there are other factors in terms of traffic, Copdock and the Orwell Bridge. So we've got all these things that could mitigate the development and could mitigate the traffic, the cycle path, more buses, better broadband, Copdock improvement, or bridge improvement. But these don't exist, and they might exist in 10 years, they might exist in 20 years, but they don't exist now. And we can't approve planning applications based on what might happen in the future to make the traffic that's already there go away. We have to look at what the situation is now, and the situation is now is that this is not sustainable. This is not sustainable development. Just on the points I've just made. I'd like to second some of the points that were made earlier about the lack of doctors, surgeries. There's only one shop. It's a village shop. It's not open that much. It's run by volunteers. The pub is currently closed. There's no employment in the area, so people are going to drive. They're going to use their cars to get around. These things are located far away when they want to get to them. So, a lot of people have talked about the heritage response, but I think we do need to look more at the traffic and the cumulative effect of traffic and the contribution this has. And we can't hope that a cycle path and some buses and better broadband will appear and people will work from home or cycle to work. We have to look at the facts, and the facts are that this is unsustainable. And that's me done. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Hardacre. Before I go for questions, I'm going to ask the Chief Planning Officer today, Steve at Stroud, and the legal Ian, whether they can comment on what you've said about the cumulative impact of applications. Can you take that point between the two of you? Hello?
Hello, Chair. You go first, Stephen, please.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yep. Okay. So effectively, I think there's a slide in Jo Hobbs' presentation where she talks about how various committed developments and uncommitted developments have been considered by the Highway Authority and through the transport assessment of the applicant. I think in terms of the degree to which it's material to consider cumulative impacts, that's obviously correct and true where you have got committed developments, i.e. those developments which already have permission and are likely to come forward, and to weigh those up against what will be the impacts from this particular application. However, what I think members need to be careful not to do is start to engage today in a beauty contest with other sites which as of yet have been undetermined, and looking ahead to sites which may or may not come forward through the emerging local plan, or may not end up being allocated in the emerging neighbourhood plan. So to an extent, yes, absolutely, accumulation is very important, but we need to be careful to do it appropriately and within the sphere that we can, i.e. in relation to those developments which have already been taken into account and have permission.
Thank you. Ian, can you on the... I had a question, a comment from Councillor Hinton saying that valid consideration after recent appeals decision, the business of community. Can you help?
Well, I think I agree with what Stephen has said, and I think he's, as Stephen has made clear, it's not an absolute bar. I mean, yes, you do, of course, you have to consider every application on its own planning merits and demerits and the planning balance, but it's not, as I think Stephen has made clear, we're not saying you totally ignore the broader context, but the care needs to be taken in it. I think Stephen's put it very well, if I may say so. I don't need to add much more to that.
No, thank you. And I think I need to remind members, as I usually have to, that we have to deal with the application that's in front of us. Now, I'll go to Councillor Ayres. Have you got any questions at all for Councillor Hardacre, the last speaker?
No, thank you, Chairman. No, I haven't.
No, I haven't got anyone else in the box. I can see that
Chair, I think have we got Councillor Busby needing to ask a question of?
Well, he's got that for Steve, which I'll come to after I've done Councillor Hardacre. So is there any other questions that anybody want to ask Councillor Hardacre? No? Okay, I will then, thank you very much, Councillor Hardacre. I will go to Councillor Busby. He wishes to ask Stephen Stroud, the Planning Officer, a question. Okay?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's to do with the slide that you got up, slide 43, and the cumulative highway assessment. I mean, this was put together at a certain period in time. This slide excludes, and I guess because it wasn't known at the time, or snow oasis. It doesn't include the impact of a full sugar beet site, which is we're working towards. It doesn't seem to
include... question you want to ask, Steve, because that's perhaps would come up in debate, but what's your question to Stephen?
You know, if a highway assessment is not up to date, how much weight can we give it?
Right, that's very good. Stephen.
I can't comment on the applicant's transport assessment. Joe may be able to cover that point, Joe Hobbs. But certainly I'm aware that the local highway authority, the county council, will be aware and will have taken into account the full impacts of both the Sugar Beet site at full capacity, because that's already been approved and being considered and is a committed development, and also Snow Oasis, bearing in mind that I've been working very closely with colleagues from the Highway Authority for the last few years on the reserve matters for Snow Oasis, where there has been a need to reassess the transport data from that. So I'm confident that the Highway Authority have considered those particular developments and all of those that would be relevant to making a decision on this particular application.
Thank you. Case Officer Joe Hobbs, did you want to add anything on this point?
Yeah, as Steve said, the Highway Authority have considered that background traffic level from Sproughton and Sugar Beet Factory, and I did confirm that fact with them prior to this committee, and they have confirmed that they did take account of the existing committed development when considering the transport assessment for this application.
Thank you. Well, I'd just like to thank all public speakers who've taken part this morning. Hopefully you've managed to keep up with it despite the 1-2 little difficulties. We are now getting to the debate members. So I'm just going to read this bit out. As the two applications before members are identical, the debate will cover both applications. However, separate proposals, seconders and votes will have to be taken on each application. Are all members clear on that procedure?
Yes.
No, yeah, well, as long as you don't say no, then that's okay.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, you're always that bowing. Okay, then I will now open the item up for debate, and this is where I will again start with alphabetical order. But if you want to tap in the box, then you can do. Councillor Sue Ayres. Hello. Oh no. Hello.
Chair, I don't know if you can hear, but in the absence of Councillor Ayres, I did type in the box. So, in the absence of Councillor Ayres, if I could jump in front, Chair, if
yes,
that's
please do, please do.
Thank you very much, Lee.
If I could interrupt councillors, if we haven't got Councillor Ayres, I would recommend that we stop briefly to try and reconnect, because if
yes,
Councillor
please,
Ayres would not be able to take part in the vote if we did any discussion in the debate without her.
Right. That's correct. Can you try and phone her?
Yep, I'll ask my colleague to help me out. So, Chair, if we just take a very short adjournment just to try and reconnect. Yes. Thank you, Chair.
Just a short adjournment, a couple of minutes. Can you still hear me?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah, you can hear. Good, good.
Yeah, got you.
Thank you. I'll just do a roll call to see we got all the others. Councillor Barrett? Councillor Barrett? Councillor Busby?
I'm here. Sorry, Peter. Chair, I am here. I just took a quick comfort break. Apologies.
Right. I'm here. Right. Councillor Hinton?
Here.
Councillor Jameson?
Yeah, here.
Councillor McCallum?
Here.
Councillor Osborne?
Here.
Councillor Owen?
Here.
Councillor Parker?
Present.
And Councillor Plum?
Present.
So we're just missing Councillor Ayres then still.
Yes, Chair, I believe my colleague is contacting her as of this moment.
Right. I'll just take a quick comfort break.
Councillor Ayres, are you back with us now?
Yes, I'm sorry about that. What happened was something came up to say it got to close all my apps to do something to do with Microsoft. Sorry.
All right,
Hello. Yes, you're back. Good. Yep. We're all back present. Okay. Councillor Ayres, you can hear us? You're muted.
Yeah,
yeah,
fine.
lovely. Right. We'll now open that up for debate. And Councillor Sue Ayres, would you like to start? Hello?
Sorry, I switched it off. Yes, no, I don't want to bring anything to debate, but other members. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Right. Have we... Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I was just going to make the point, Chair, if I may, that obviously in committee when we were in chamber, generally speaking, I think you refer back to officers after, each of the speakers to see if they have any comments to make, and we haven't done that this morning. And I just wondered if the officers, either they do or they don't. If they don't, it's not a problem. But I wondered if the officers do have any comments to make on anything that any of the speakers said at all.
I think they were going to interrupt me if they wanted, from what I remember. But anyway, yes, there's certainly a point we can put to them, to the case officer and the chief planning officer. Was there anything that you heard from the public speakers and the two councillors that you wish to share with us?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take that first, if that's okay. No, I think I personally I answered the questions as they came up, and I did ask us to interject at one point as well, just to make an additional comment. So, from my perspective, I felt that I answered all the questions, but I'm sure there'll be further matters raised during the debate, which I can respond further to.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it was a valid point by Councillor Parker, because normally we do it in the chamber. But Stephen Stroud.
Nothing really greatly to say at this point, Chair, only that obviously hearing the various things that have been put forward so far, and I think having regard to Joe Hobbs's report, there are obviously a number of what you might call black letter harms or technical breaches in terms of policy that have been acknowledged in terms of landscape, obviously bearing in mind it's a greenfield site, and the flooding point. But obviously one of the key issues here, members, is I think heritage is really quite important. And I know this is something that we end up stressing every meeting, but it is something that obviously members have to bear in mind and indeed attach a considerable importance to. Obviously, I did note from the applicant's comments that they said that any level of harm should be weighed against the benefits, which is absolutely correct, in line with the paragraph 196 test in the MPPF, and obviously also made the comment that the benefits were particularly considerable, and obviously that's a matter of judgment that the members themselves can consider. The one point I would add is that any harm itself must have considerable weighting and importance attached to it. Just because there's an agreement that there is less than substantial harm does not mean that it's less than significant or less than important. So members do need to seriously consider those points when they're carrying out their powering balance shortly.
Thank you. Yep. Okay. Any other? We're in debate now, so any other member that wishes to say anything?
Yes, please.
Yes, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to kick off, really, perhaps, and talk about what I see as some of the benefits and harm. We're no strangers to planning applications that have a lot of controversy, so and this is no different, really. Real difficult to weigh up all those concerns that residents have against some of the benefits. But I do believe, I think there are some benefits that we haven't heard very much about, really. The affordable units, the single story that's always very welcome. It's not an isolated location. It's well connected to major sites of employment, three miles away in Ipswich and closer because of the proximity to the industrial areas on that side of Ipswich. And And the village of Sproughton has school and a few amenities that could be accessed quite easily. I think there's a benefit also with the footpath that is introduced that allows people to even closer passage near those remarkable barns that are quite a feature. On the heritage aspects, there is quite a number of buildings that are noted, but I think on the day of our site inspection that we all benefited from, we were struck by the views across the site towards the church that have the building in the background, where the former sugar beet factory was, the warehouse. So I'm sort of taking that into account as well in terms of the harm. I don't think that is that harm. The harm of this development is in any way as significant as that harm is already apparent. Also, the pylons are harm as well, and I think that this development is not as harmful as those parts of infrastructure that are on the skyline. So I'd be very interested to hear what others what their thoughts are as we go through the debate. But I thought I'd share those with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hinton, you've got several points to raise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First one, of course, is the one that you stopped me on earlier on when you said it was more of a point for the debate rather than anything else, and that was concerning SIL income versus expenditure, and also the provision of healthcare facilities. We're looking here at, if we start off with healthcare facilities, at doctors' surgeries up in Pinewood. Now, they're a considerable distance away from this site by road, or whatever means you like to use. But unless you're a crow, of course, it's only 2 kilometres. But one of the problems that we seem to have with the NHS when it comes to these planning applications is that we're dealing with the NHS provider rather than the person who actually does the job. So what we end up with is a request for a SIL contribution for a new room on a doctor's surgery to make it more amenable. And I believe it says in the report that it talks about extra accommodation and refurbishing and so forth. But nowhere does it mention anything about an extra healthcare professional to be able to cope with the extra demand. Now, we know that the healthcare has been under extreme stress just recently, and it's the same across the whole country when it comes to a shortage of GPs, etc. But we've got to make sure that we keep these things in balance and we're not always playing catch-up, because I'm sure that if we looked at the figures from the Pinewood surgeries at the moment, we would find that the ratio of doctors to patients is higher. Patients to doctors is higher than it should be under the NHS guidelines and the government proposals. So that's one of the first points. The other point was about the SIL income. We're talking about 32 houses that are actually going to contribute towards SIL income because the affordables don't pay SIL. And yet in paragraph 10 on page 41, it talks about nearly £500,000 of expenditure on SIL provisions for various things, including the provision of the pedestrian crossings and bus stops and goodness only knows what else. Nothing there within the proposals is there to actually mitigate the extra traffic flows. And we're talking here about people having to get into their cars to go anywhere, because we're not going to see pensioners who are sickly getting on their bicycles and cycling to Pinewood. They're going to have to go by car. We've heard from the local member and from the county councillor that the bus service is inadequate. There's probably one a day or something. It's not very good. So unless we're going to see a massive increase in public transport, we're going to have to see some sort of community transport. We're going to have to see something put in there for people to actually access facilities. The industrial sites at Ipswich have been raised. We also know that the big, dirty, great big blob of a building that has got permission, that's on that sugar beet factory site, that if you remember from the planning application when it came before the committee, I did ask the question as about where were the employees going to come from for that site, and the actual applicant did say that they would be transferred from their existing sites elsewhere across the region. So we're not actually creating any more employment there. So we've then got the possibility of extra traffic coming through Sproughton to get to that site, because unless it comes down the A14, it's got to go somewhere to get to there. We know that the traffic from Hadley into Ipswich causes problems at the Beagle roundabout, and because of those problems, traffic tends to nip down through Birstall and down to the Wildman Junction, and then cut across there to get into Ipswich. So there is a major problem with traffic in that area, but it's not being addressed. We're just adding to it. The Wolsey Grange development is going to create all sorts of problems in terms of traffic flows up around that area. So there's going to be an increasing flow of traffic away from that area. So traffic's a major problem. We also heard from the parish council that there is a 15-metre gap between proposed developments at Bramford and Sproughton along the whatever it's called, I can't remember the road name, it's gone out of the top of my head now, the road between Bramford and Sproughton. The NPPF specifically says that applications that create joining up of population centres shouldn't be allowed. There should be a distinct gap between population centres. There shouldn't be any of these joining up. So there's something supposed to be happening there. Where we are talking about the cumulative effect of all of these developments is going to be phenomenal on that part of the area. So unless there is really significant impact there, then we want to have something happening there. I mentioned the unadopted roads when I asked the question from the applicant about the unadopted roads within the development and the open space. Who is going to maintain this open space? The affordable housing is looking out onto that open space, but are they going to pay for it to be maintained? I don't think so. Somebody's going to have to afford to pay for that to be maintained. And we're also looking at this deficit of any form of housing need. This is not hinterland, a core village, it's a hinterland village, and therefore CS11 applies to there. So there should be a detailed housing need supplied by the developer. They shouldn't be relying on the parish to provide them with that information. Parish should provide their information if they're going to object to an application, but the developer should be justifying his application with a detailed housing need survey, which hasn't been done. Then we've got the impact on the listed buildings. That can never be mitigated in any way, in my opinion. There is always going to be impact on those buildings, and I think if it's the cumulative effect of harm over benefit is going to be taken into consideration, then I think that there are more negatives than there are positives to this application. And certainly I don't think I can support it on many grounds, including CS11, the NPPF, but also where are the jobs?
Thank you. Thank you, John. You've got quite a few questions there, which I will get Joe Hobbs and Stephen Stroud to answer in a moment. But I want to bring in Dave Busby because he has a comment on your point about the National Health Service. So I'll go to Dave Busby, and after you've made your comments about that particular point, I'll get the answers to both John and you. Councillor Busby?
Thank you. It's just Pinewood Surgery is actually full and they're looking for somewhere else. The point about this is a small development, really. And it comes at the end of a number of larger developments. The impact of Wolsey Grange on the NHS is far more significant than this will ever be, and they're going to have to find a solution for that, which I guess this area will buy into. I mean, there are a number of issues that John's raised which are based on the cumulative impacts, traffic, the NHS, things like that. And it's difficult when you've got a small application like this, it comes at the end and the harm has already been done. The damage to Sproughton from the traffic of Snow Oasis, the Sugar Beet site, all the development along the B113 and Wolsey Grange will be significant. This won't, I don't think, will be the straw that breaks the camel's back, because I think it's already broken. We need to focus on the impact that this particular development has on Sproughton. I'll come back on that later.
Right, thank you. I'll now get.
If I could come back on Dave's point there, that is the very point that I'm trying to make, is the fact that we keep on putting off the solutions to these problems in the hope that something else will come up and sort it out, and it doesn't. It just gets worse and worse and worse. You've only got to look at the traffic on the A14, A12, Orwell Bridge, all these other sort of problems. And it might be a small development, and therefore it's not going to have a significant impact on the surgery at Pinewood, unless the surgery at Pinewood says, sorry, we can't cope with you, you'll have to find somewhere else. Then what are they going to do?
Thank you. Councillor Jameson, is your point on this, or is that something totally different?
No, if you want to get your answers, then I'll come in after that.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm now going to go to Stephen Strode, Planning Officer, and Joe Hobbs. Okay, would one of you like to start?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think perhaps I could start, and Steve, if you want to come in with anything else, that's okay. Yeah, certainly, perhaps on the last point you made there, Councillor Hinton, about existing issues and needing to address them now. I think I just need to raise a point of kind of planning law on that particular matter, that unfortunately we are bound to only consider how this development can mitigate for its own impacts. And we can consider also other schemes coming forwards, as this scheme has, with other kind of potential developments, and they've come up with a joint solution to pay into a pot of Section 106 monies for highway improvements. But we can't resolve the existing issues for Sproughton, such as when the A14 is shut, for example, and the fact that traffic tries to go through Sproughton. We can't use this application to try and address wider issues that perhaps already exist, and that's just a point of planning law that I just need to raise on that matter. But then just to go through the other matters that you raised, the doctor's surgery being capacity, we obviously have a response from NHS England saying that they have no objection if they can receive the SIL monies, which they will be able to bid for, and are obviously high priority for our council to award funding to from our SIL pot. We can't obviously direct how the NHS decides to spend that money, whether they choose to extend an existing surgery or move to a new hub of surgeries. It's a strategy for the NHS to decide, unfortunately, and it's not something that we can necessarily intervene on, but we can only comment on the fact that this scheme contributes the required amount to that healthcare provision. Then just to move on to the other issues of the settlement coalescence, maintaining open space and housing needs. With the settlement coalescence, this application site is at some distance to the nearest next proposed application site, which was the, if I get the plan up, that'll be easier. Here we go. So we've got our application site here, I'm hovering now, and then we have the next proposed planning application site, which doesn't have consent yet, to the south of Bramford here. I believe some of the land in between was put forward by developers as a suggested site allocation, but certainly there are no current planning applications on this land, and the emerging joint local plan doesn't look to allocate any of this land. So in the committee report that's been written for this application, we consider that there is a good degree of separation still between Bramford and Sproughton, and that we don't consider there is a settlement coalescence that would merit refusal of the application on that basis. I'm aware perhaps Sproughton Parish and Sproughton Working Group have raised the fact that some of this land in between is being put forward by the landowners at least. For the open space management for the scheme, that would be covered by the legal agreement for the Section 106, and the options would be a management company if the parish council didn't want to take on the land at all. So there would be a mechanism in there to ensure that that open space is maintained and managed and open and available for use for the future in perpetuity. And lastly, the housing needs assessment. Obviously, like I said in my presentation, a full housing needs assessment hasn't been done, but the applicants did provide some information from the local community when they held their public exhibition and asked for feedback on what housing people felt was needed. And so we do have some evidence to meet the requirements of policy CS11. But as I say, we just need to advise caution that it's not a fully compliant study, and so we just need to raise that slight conflict with that policy there. But they have done some work to try and assess that housing need. Hopefully that answers the questions.
Stephen, did you want to add anything?
No, I think Joe's pretty much covered everything. Obviously, Councillor Hinton will come back if not. I think the only other point I would make is that obviously I'm aware that obviously virtually every committee I think I can recall where Councillor Hinton has participated, obviously still has come up as an issue, and the regime has been criticised. But unfortunately, members, we are a still charging authority, and we've been very clear that matters such as health infrastructure will be covered by the infrastructure levy, and that's the reality of it. And I think if members are minded to put forward, if they disagree with the officer recommendation, that should be a reason for refusal, I would urge extreme caution on that point if we were to find ourselves in an appeal situation.
Thank you. Councillor Jameson, I've got you down, but I'm going to take Councillor and then Councillor Parker because they both want to come back on this particular point. So, Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, coming back on Joe's point about we've got to look at the application and not seek to use this application to cure the ills of Sproughton. We're not seeking to cure the ills of Sproughton. What we should be looking at is avoiding contributing to the ills of Sproughton, because if we're just going to make the situation worse with every single application, then we're just as much of a problem as everything else is.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll be short and sweet because actually Stephen Stroud absolutely took the words out of my mouth. But I will just make the extra point, Chair, that in the report itself, page 18, NHS England, I mean, yes, of course, we have to take things into account, but NHS England themselves clearly have no objection. The SIL is a ring-fenced amount, so I just... at the dare or the risk of being really controversial about this, I just wonder if we're trying to fix a problem that the NHS themselves don't seem to have.
Thank you. Councillor Jameson, you've patiently waited. You can come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have a lot of the concerns already expressed, but I need to mention was the location of this development to the flood plains. Now, I know this is on flood zone 1, but if I think it's slide 42, this is still, some of these properties are still bumping up very close to the flood zones 2 and 3, and it doesn't take a lot of extra flooding before these properties suddenly become underwater, and it is a concern, especially with climate change and the more rain we're getting, as we've seen in other parts of the country. Places that have never been flooded are suddenly under deep water, and to build this close to some of to a known floodplain is a bit of a concern.
I'll ask the case officer to answer that one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, it certainly was something that we did give serious consideration in this application, because obviously we don't want to build homes which we then in the future have to deal with any flooding events. But the information we have on this application is that the flood modelling, so the flood zone shown here, flood zone 2, I'm just hovering over at the moment, with a 65% allowance for climate change. So this has been modelled on future rainfall events, the worst future events, and a climate change allowance within there as well. So this really is the worst case scenario that has been modelled. And then I think the next point I'd have to turn members' minds to is the fact that we have to act within planning law, and I'd have to advise you the strength of any reason for refusal on flood risk grounds would be quite weak, because we have met all of the policy requirements to ensure that there is no risk of flood to people or property within the modelled flood zones with that climate change worst case scenario. So we have done everything we possibly can to eliminate the risk insofar as we can under the relevant policy framework. I think it is obviously of concern. We don't know where flooding is how the climate will change in the future, but we can only act on the information that we have now and the floods and climate change modelling that we have now. And that's what the applicants have done for this application. My recommendation is that it is on balance acceptable, and it would be a weak reason for refusal that I don't think would stand up at appeal if we were to refuse on flood risk grounds. So I hope that's given a bit of further context to the flood risk situation on the site and where officers have got to with that assessment.
Thank you. Councillor McLaren? Mary?
Thank you,
Yep.
Chair. I actually was going to raise the same thing as Councillor Jameson did. I am not satisfied really with our contributions, say, to what the Environmental Agency were recommending about no building on floodplains. I know that the requirement is probably not there, but I would have hoped the council was taking that into consideration for applications that are coming to them.
I think the officer has commented on that. Did you want to add any more, Joe?
Just to assure that the development proposed here isn't being built on floodplain, as in flood zone 2 and 3. I think that's just something we would assure, and that is with the worst case scenario modelled, as I just mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hinton, I don't think your question is relevant to this plan and application. I'll read it out, but I don't think... dare I ask Councillor Parker if there is sufficient PPE and if the National Health Service have no problem with it? Well, I think that is totally irrelevant to this plan and application. Is there any other members that wish to comment?
May I just make a comment?
Yep.
There's been some discussion about housing needs surveys and whether the developer should have embarked on their own. I must have a bit. I must admit a bit of sympathy when you look at the participation rates of 20% of residents taking part in the survey. I guess you know. Are they reliable entirely when the participation is so limited? I'm pleased to hear actually that they had a community engagement event. I don't think we heard about that yet. That was so to talk to residents and consult with them about their development. Yeah, that's really just my point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Busby?
Thank you, Chair. This is obviously going to be a balance. We need to look at the benefits and the harm that's caused by this particular application. I mean, I don't like the addition to the traffic. I don't like the threat of the flood zones either, but I think those points have been answered. We need to look at the things that this development will impact. It is in a special landscape area. It will impact the views of that particular area. We keep building on the edge of these or within them, and that has got an impact on that. In terms of the benefit side, it's only the additional houses. Now, I hear what Melanie says, but Sproughton has already doubled in size. I can't believe that if you conducted any housing needs survey, there could be a need for any more houses. There are already in excess of 1,200 that have been approved or are up for approval. So I don't think there's a need for any more houses in Sproughton. So therefore, almost if you've got anything on the harm side, it's bound to outweigh those benefits. To me, Sproughton has got a distinct boundary. Anything north of Lower Lane towards Bramford has not been built on. And this applies to the site that's come forward on the Wild Man as well. They are outside of the village boundary, and we have to consider very carefully if we approve those kind of sites. I don't think there's a particular benefit from doing that. And the key is heritage. I'm disappointed to hear that the developers, the applicants, didn't come to a grounding with the heritage officers, and such that the harm to heritage still exists. There could have been a solution to this, but we haven't found it. I don't think the changes they've made is significant enough to outweigh the harm that's caused on heritage. So I still think we're kind of back where we were before, which is that it isn't an application that we should approve. So I think the harm from this application particularly does outweigh the benefits.
Thank you. Councillor Parker, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Sorry, I couldn't find the button. I think that's a very balanced and very measured set of comments that Councillor Busby makes there. For me, the principal issue here for me is the heritage issue still, and I would like to hear that fleshed out. With regards to Councillor Busby's point around need, I have every sympathy for his comments there, and I have every sympathy indeed for the community at Sproughton, because I know there are a number of applications that may or may not be coming forward, and we'll have to deal with each of those as they do or don't come forward. The difficulty for me as a planning committee is, for all the sympathy that I have with the proposed amount of development that might be coming forward at Sproughton, we as a committee are bound by our own planning rules and indeed the National Planning Policy Framework, and I would have some serious reservations about how you would articulate any refusal based upon need at this time. And as councillors, we're elected representatives. It's right and proper that we say all the right things, of course, and that we do support our communities. But how do we articulate that? And indeed, if members were minded to refuse on the basis of need, we should always bear in mind that the reasons that we give based around the need have got to be defendable at any potential appeal hearing in the future, and I'm just not convinced that we would be able to defend on need. So for me, it's all about heritage, and I would like to have that conversation fleshed out some more.
Thank you. Officers, did you want to come back on any of that you've heard? No,
I don't think there's anything particular I want to mention.
Councillor Plum.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much. I thought it was about the time I said something. I'm very, very, very much aware of the fact that I live a long way from Sproughton, and what happens here will hardly affect me at all. But I do have some concerns that the accumulative effect we're seeing on infrastructure we can't take into consideration because it's a standalone application. Yep. But I am very much feeling that we are in a situation where if you go to CS2 as defined, adopted in August 2014, we're going against that in terms of this particular one. So I think it's very much a conflict with core strategy CS2. And to me, the heritage impact far outweighs any public benefits that we have at all, because I think the comments that were made that if we do this, that will be it. We will lose the heritage lookouts, the heritage views of these particular items, and that to me is not lessons of substantial harm. It is harm. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Hinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just coming back, as we got that screen of slide 44 up, which shows broad compliance with CS11. Well, I've got CS11 open in front of me, and it doesn't even broadly comply with the criteria for a core village, let alone with the hinterland village. And it does also, took in there, says it actually in the CS11, the cumulative impact of development within both the hinterland village in which the development is proposed and within the functional cluster of villages, which presumably would include the Wolseley Grange estate, in which it is located, will be a material consideration when assessing such proposals. So I think there are far too many boxes within CS11 which come up with a minus rather than a plus to make it acceptable under CS11. And certainly I agree with Councillor Plum and with others on the heritage implication. Once we destroy the heritage, then, or in terms of views or whatever, then we've destroyed it. That's it.
Thank you. Did planning officers want to come back on that?
I wouldn't mind just coming back on one issue about the cumulative issue, because I think there might be two kind of conversations going on about that. Cumulative issue, it is a consideration, as Councillor Hinton rightly identifies, under CS11, and it is a matter that we have looked at in this application. I think there might be two different discussions going on, where there's the background, say traffic levels and existing issues within Sproughton, but we're looking at this application. What traffic does this application add to that network in accumulation with the existing background traffic levels and with those other planning applications that we've identified in the surrounding area? So it has made a cumulative assessment with the relevant considerations, but it's just we can't look at the existing issues. I think I just want to make that separation, just so members are aware that we are considering this cumulatively, but only within the bounds that we can, not to address all existing issues, as my example earlier said, of say if the A14 shuts and traffic coming through Sproughton, that's not something that we can seek to address. I hope that clarifies the matter for members on the cumulative issue.
Yes, I think we have been there before. I've got two people at the moment, three, another one. Councillor Parker, followed by Councillor Ayres.
Well, Chair, obviously this is now going to be a fast-moving debate. Can I defer my question and allow Councillor Ayres to go first, actually?
Thank you. Councillor Ayres.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say I do know the area very well, having travelled the Rat Run for about 20 years on my way to various schools. But I've listened to the debate and listened to what other people have to say. Interesting that Councillor Barrett said about below a quarter of the people in the surrounding area responded to the questionnaire. But I'm looking more on the positive side, and would go forward to recommend that we approve.
Oh, right. Thank you. So you're proposing that we accept the officer's recommendation?
Yes, that is correct, Chairman.
Right. At this point, then, I must ask for a seconder before we can continue. Do I have a seconder to the proposal put forward by Councillor Suez?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Osborne, you have seconded it. Did you wish to comment at this moment?
Not at this time.
No. Okay.
I'd like to come back eventually.
Let me just proposed. Seconded. Thank you. Right, now I'll get back to where we were. Councillor Parker, did you want to come in now?
Yeah, okay, Chair, I will do. I mean, obviously you've got a proposal on the table now, but okay. I still maintain that the predominant issue here is heritage. So I would like to just ask a question of our officer, because there is there is some conflicting, some contradictory information within the report, and I'm looking particularly at Heritage's response on page 21, and they themselves. So our Heritage team, whilst I'm absolutely mindful of the fact that they don't support this application, they themselves do say that the development is less harmful to the significance of the various assets than it was previously, and yet we have heard lots of comment from both councillors, the speakers, that actually nothing has changed in this application from previous applications. But I would argue that actually it has subtly. The layout of the site has sought at least to go some way to mitigating some of the supposed harm. Yep. So I really, without putting the officer on the spot, I'm looking for clarification. Has this changed significantly enough to warrant members to reconsider the previous decision?
I think this is where your balance and skills has to come into it, Councillor Parker, but I'll see if I can get an answer to help us all. Joe or Stephen?
Yes, I'll take that one if that's okay, Chair.
Yep.
Yes, on page 21 of the committee report, under the title for Heritage, comments on the original scheme for 54 dwellings. I'm sorry, we should have made it clearer. Originally, the scheme was for more dwellings, and I think I didn't want to go chapter and verse into every single iteration of this application because it would be a very long report. But the Heritage comments on page 21 saying that the heritage harm had reduced from a previous iteration of the scheme for even more dwellings on the site, and I think it was a scale issue as well. I think potentially there were less single-storey dwellings. So to draw back to this application now, if we turn over the page to page 22, the comments from Heritage on the 49 dwellings, the level of harm stays the same in Heritage officers' terms between the scheme for 54 dwellings and 49 dwellings. So apologies, the reduction harm was for an earlier scheme. I think the very first submitted scheme with the planning application, which was for more dwellings. But just for avoidance of doubt, for the scheme that members looked at last year to now, the Heritage level of harm remains the same in officers' opinion.
Thank you. Councillor Plum.
Thank you, Chair. I think the proposal has got a little bit ahead of this answer, but I was going to respond to the officer's comments about highways. When someone like myself was talking about infrastructure, we're very much taking on the comments that John Hinton made in terms of infrastructure is not only the roads, it's the use of those roads, because people may have to drive to doctor's surgeries way outside the area that they could walk in. So I'm just a little bit concerned that we're not thinking of the cumulative effects on highways, but I accept that. Meantime, I would say we must really, really concentrate on the heritage things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, is there any other comments that members want to make? Right, well, there's been a proposal put forward to accept the officer's recommendation proposed by Councillor Sue Ayres, and it's been seconded by Councillor Adrian Osborne, that we accept the officer's recommendations as in our papers. So with that, I'm now going to ask Rob Carmichael to do the roll call and go through the members to vote.
Thank you, Chair. And this is just to confirm, this is on the first application that we are looking at of, I'll just get the reference number for clarity.
I can tell you what that is.
It is DC 18 DC 18 0201. So I'll take them in order. If you could please respond with for, against, or abstain. So Councillor Sue Ayres.
For.
Councillor Melanie Barrett.
For.
Councillor Peter Beer.
For.
Councillor David Busby.
Against.
Councillor John Hinton.
Against.
Councillor Lee Jameson.
Against.
Councillor Mary McLaren.
Against.
Councillor Adrian Osborne.
For.
Councillor Alison Owen.
Against.
Councillor Lee Parker.
Against.
Councillor Stephen Plum.
Against.
Thank you, members. The motion is lost.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just to confirm as legal that I counted as well. Indeed, 7 votes to 4 it is lost.
Yep, that's what I've got as well. Thank you very much. Right, so now I need to ask you how you wish to go forward now. We need another motion put forward by those that voted against. Councillor Busby.
Thank you. Well, I think it's against heritage. I think the impact on heritage, I'm not good with numbers and policies, but I think the heritage impact is still too great. And I think in the conclusions you mentioned core strategy CS2, and I'm not convinced about CS11 being in broad compliance either.
That was the housing survey, yep. Right. Officers, is that acceptable?
Yes, it might be worth just coming in here, Peter, because obviously Councillor Beer, because we're obviously staring down an overturn here, and I think it's really important that we just articulate the key issues in order that we can formulate any reasons for refusal. Yep. I think obviously there is a breach of CS2. I think that's acknowledged in the officer report. That's fine. Obviously there is that fact that it is in the countryside, and presumably members are saying there are no exceptional circumstances, and certainly the need for this development isn't justifiable in light of the harms. I think just on the broader CS11 point, I would be cautious about saying that there isn't necessarily a locally identified need. I think we saw that play out in the Long Melford inquiry, and obviously we had a decision from the Secretary of State on that only a few weeks ago. I think it's going to be very difficult, certainly in the absence of any clear direction to the contrary from members on this, that there isn't a need. Obviously, officers have suggested that whilst it's slightly scant, that there is a pointing to there being a need to be fulfilled by this development.
I'll ask Councillor Busby in a moment to re-look at that CS 11. But if you'd like to carry on with the other issues, heritage.
Okay, Chair. And then actually, from my own view, I think this ultimately is a heritage case, and I think obviously members have made a number of comments now about heritage. I think in respect of that, what would be really useful is to understand first and foremost how harmful it is. And whether this is they're following the officer's conclusion that it is a medium level of less than substantial harm, and more importantly that it is less than substantial harm. That doesn't mean, as I said previously, that the harm is less than significant. It's just that in MPPF parlance it just affects the way that you deal with that harm, and obviously you do attach a considerable importance to it. And I think as a number of members have said, that the harm would be not outweighed by the public benefits. In doing so, it would be also really useful to understand which assets themselves are being harmed by, or would be harmed by this development. And I think there is detail for that in the officer report, and indeed the previous resolution of this committee, which, not meaning to influence members, but just pointing out as a matter of fact, they were Sproughton Hall, Root Barn, Tithe Barn, and the Great Two Star listed All Saints Church. So if that could be clarified, that would be really useful.
Thank you. Councillor Busby, you've heard all that. I think the CS2 housing survey, the feeling is that perhaps that wouldn't be sensible to pursue that one, but you could elaborate on the heritage medium to harm, and that could carry weight with CS2.
Well, I think we take the heritage officer's comments on that. I think he's exactly right on that. I take odds with the housing need. The only housing need survey was conducted before Wolseley Grange has been built out. I think if they conducted a housing needs survey now, which is when we're actually doing the decision, I'm not so certain that there would be shown from Sproughton residents that there would be a housing need. And I think the other points that I would also bring in, that this is outside the village boundary, therefore it has to show a much greater positive benefit than harm. And I don't think it does. Plus, there's also the harm to the SLA.
Well, council officers, I think Councillor Busby has made a case for keeping CS11 housing survey in his recommendation for refusal. How do you want to comment on that?
Well, ultimately, that's obviously I think as data, you've got the we could be looking at as an opening for the reasons for refusal. Then the circumstances of the application and the proposed development are not exceptional and without a proven justifiable need, contrary to policy CS2 and CS11.
Would that be acceptable, Councillor Busby?
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, Steve.
And yes, go on. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Chair. And then moving on to the heritage. Before I do, I just on the SLA point. Again, this is something that is covered in the officer report, and obviously there will always be an element of harm to the development of a greenfield site. But in landscape terms, obviously, this site is not necessarily representative of the whole of the special landscape area. It is, I think, from the report noted that it's a relatively enclosed site, and I think we might be hard pressed to defend a discrete and independent landscape reason for refusal. But again, I put that to Councillor Busby, and if he wants to press that point, then obviously we can keep it. But I think certainly the heritage point is probably going to be far stronger.
Yes, I agree. I think we're only looking at small elements that are still contrary and provide harm. The biggest one, obviously, is heritage. So out of 100, you'd probably apply 80 points to the heritage. But there are other factors which cumulatively add up to saying that the harm is greater than the benefit.
Right, thank you. I've got Councillor Jamieson followed by Councillor Hinton. So I'll just take Councillor Jamieson's point. Does CR04 not come into play as well in regards to the SLA? Councillor Jamieson?
Well, I was just thinking it's just trying to get CR04 back up on my screen because I've lost it. It says it's maintain and enhance the special landscape area, qualities of the area. Well, this doesn't really do that, and in line with also the heritage aspects, I wondered if that may be able to be taken into account.
Stephen?
So CR04 is from, it's a saved policy from the old local plan 2006. It is relevant purely in respect of special land areas, and that's right, the policy text does require maintenance or enhancement of the area. But I'd make the point, if this is an element of the reasons for refusal to be put forward, I think you need to be clear, why it would be contrary to that particular policy, and why any mitigating measures or the design of the scheme don't necessarily deal with that point.
Right, thank you. Councillor Busby, do you want to accept CR04? And if you do, to elaborate on it.
No, do I? I hear he says, I think it's the objection strong enough without CR04, but it just makes a point.
Thank you. Then I've got Councillor Hinton. Would you like to come in now? Councillor Hinton?
Yeah, sorry, just getting to the right button to press. Yes, I would like to second Councillor Busby's proposal. And can I suggest that when you're looking at the final summary, which is slide 44, it's in conflict with the core strategy CS2. Broad it says broad compliance on this, and I would have to say that it's in broad conflict with CS11 and CS15. Points in CS11 are against this site, but more are against it than are in favour of it. So the balance of acceptance or harm, if you like to call it that, in planning terms, is against this proposal using both CS11 and CS15.
Thank you. Yes, go on.
Oh, sorry, Chair. Just to say that yes, obviously we will import a planning balance into this final resolution for members to or for the proposer to consider, because obviously it's not just a case of chucking some reasons for refusal. I think bearing in mind this is an overturn, we need to be very clear about the reasons and follow through kind of the general approach to planning balance. I'm just wondering if I might just have 2 minutes just to knock something together and then come back with some words for Councillor Busby to consider.
And then I'll ask if him and the seconder want to accept that. Yep, that'll be fine. Cool down.
Councillor Parker's got something to say, I think.
Councillor Parker, we can take that while he's doing that.